Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku discovered the truth about his birth family part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. So let's start the video. Green trailer chapter text: a young boy with messy green hair and dark green eyes walked through the emerald-colored forest. His green hood and cape clung to his muscular yet petite figure, while his sword the size of his torso bounced on his back in time with his steps. His dark eyes scanned the terrain, fidgeting at any sign of bushes rustling or the sounds of branches snapping, no matter how distant the sounds may be. His gloved hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, anxious. In his ear, a female voice spoke. "You see anything yet, Izuku?" Pressing a finger to his ear to activate his earpiece, Izuku replied, "Not yet." "Young, are you sure this is the path you took to that house?" "I dunno, I was 5 at the time. But it was somewhere in that direction that I found you. Maybe just wander around a bit until something triggers." Izuku's older sister, young 𝗧𝗏, replied nonchalantly on the other end. With a sigh, Izuku shook her head at her sister's carefreeness. In truth, he admired how she always lived life in the moment, not worrying about what's to come. Usually, he tried to be like that, but his brain often insisted on overanalyzing every situation until all he could see were the negatives and ways everything could backfire. Izuku rattled his head back and forth, slapping his cheeks repeatedly to ground him back in reality. No side tangents. He needs to focus. If he doesn't find this spot today, he probably won't get the chance for a whole year, if not even longer. As he finished that thought, he broke through the long line of trees only to come across a thin, wide-open dirt path that reached into the horizon in both directions. In one direction, he saw that the path reached into a small town, while the other trailed into seemingly nowhere. Taking a deep breath, Izuku tilted his head back and closed his eyes. A voice spoke in his mind, one of a man with a strong yet warm tone. "Trust your instincts. A hero's judgment is always sound." Letting his breath slip past through his lips, his eyes fluttered open, and once again he looked back and forth in the two directions. All of his senses tingled, and the light breeze in the air made goosebumps crawl across his skin. Silently, he pulled up his hood, reached out a hand towards the center of the path, and closed his eyes once more. "Whoever you are, whatever is causing this, please, just give me a sign. Point me towards answers." Out of nowhere, the light breeze picked up into a strong gust of wind, so much so that it sent Izuku's cape flapping in one direction, nearly choking the boy in the process. With a sharp gasp, the boy's eyes shot open and he looked to see the cape pointing down the direction of nowhere. Excited, the boy looked up to the sky in silent thanks before he summoned his semblant, causing bright green lightning to form all around his body as pure energy rushed through his veins, propelling him down the dirt path so quickly that he stirred up a cloud behind him. Breath shallow yet tight, he ran and ran and ran, waiting to see something beyond the endless trees, waiting to see a sign that he was on the right path, waiting to see something change about the greenery and repetitive foliage. He didn't know what he was looking for, but suspected he would know when he found it. He didn't know for how long he traveled down that path, nor did he know how much time passed. Soon, he slid to a stop upon seeing a fallen tree block the path. As he walked up to it, he saw that the tree crossed the path and leaned onto the tree on the other side, with moss and vines crawling up the old log as pieces of the dead tree fluttered into the dirt below. Blade cuts and claw marks were scattered all across the log, but, for the most part, the dead tree stayed intact. Tracing his hand along the moist yet crumbling bark, Izuku walked towards the lower end of the tree where he noticed that the tree's bottom tier was rough and abrupt, like someone shoved the tree off of its stump with an almost impossible amount of force. Beyond the snapped tree and broken stump, Izuku saw a deep crater in the grass, far deeper in the ground than it was in radius. Curiously, he approached the crater and knelt down beside it, sticking his hand into the dirt. To his surprise, the first layer of the crater was not dirt, but rather an ash and rock mixture that stood out against all the surroundings. Amongst the ash layer, he spotted a flash of whitish yellow peeking out from the gray. Narrowing his gaze, he reached over and carefully pulled the paper from the ash, dusting it off and inspecting it. Strangely, the language on the paper wasn't written in Common, the language most well known across Remnant, nor any smaller language that Izuku's ever seen. Still, for some reason, he could read what it said. Hero in Training, Provisional License, Hero in Training. Like the heroes from fairy tales. But why did it phrase it like a career choice? Was it another term for huntsman? Visions of a giant academy shaped like a capital H flashed through his mind like a picture book. The visions showed several teens with strange body structures and outfits like something out of a comic book. In the center of it all showed a giant, muscular man with a bright smile, pointed golden hair, and a reassuring aura. Even though all of it looked wildly out of place, the sight of them felt all too familiar to Izuku, like a 𝐒𝐻𝐻. Dropping the paper, Izuku stumbled back, clutching his head in agony. Whatever caused those visions drilled into his mind, splitting it in two. The pain grew stronger and stronger with each vision, until the pain overtook his strength to even stand. Luckily, as quickly as the visions and pain appeared, they vanished, leaving only lingering images in his mind, blurred like a camera out of focus on a rainy day. They slipped through Izuku's fingertips like water, with only droplets left stuck to his fingers. Still, droplets of water were an improvement to the parched state his mind was in before, so Izuku will consider this a victory, no matter how minor it might be. Before Izuku could process that further, the sound of growling caught his attention. Reaching for his blade, Izuku spun around in time to see several, human-sized, bipedal wolves with fur darker than the midnight sky and eyes like rubies yet darkened like spilt blood. Narrowing his gaze at his new enemies, Izuku slyly picked up the paper and slipped it into his pocket for safekeeping. He charged up his semblance in preparation, awaiting the enemy to make the first move. On cue, one of the wolves charged forward, racing towards Izuku on all fours before it reached out to swipe at the boy with its claw. However, Izuku acted faster, leaping over the wolf and digging his sword into the creature's back. He pushed himself off the creature's back, slicing the creature cleanly in two. Izuku landed on the dirt path and turned back towards the other enemies, who all growled at the sight of one of their own turning into ash. Two wolves charged towards Izuku from either side, both of them with a claw raised to strike. However, Izuku rolled underneath the two, pushing upwards as soon as he was back on his feet and spinning his blade around himself, cutting both wolves clean in two. Another wolf leapt down on Izuku from above, but he used his semblance to leap out of the way. Using his momentum to his advantage, he pushed off of a tree to gain enough height to jump down on the wolf from above, digging his sword into the wolf's back when he landed. Pressing a switch on his handle, he triggered the barrel built into the back of the sword, firing several shots into the creature's back and the recoil sending the boy flying back. He rolled along the grass and leapt up onto his feet. However, this split second of vulnerability left enough time for another wolf to strike the boy from behind, sending him flying forward, straight into the rough dirt. He threw out his arm to soften the blow by a roll, but the impact sent a shot of pain up through that same arm. Still, the boy brushed it off and turned back towards his attacker. Quickly, he realized this wolf wasn't like the others, instead wearing an exoskeleton on his head and limbs, with spikes sticking out of its elbows and knees like some teen's goth design for a creature. The new wolf emitted a far more menacing aura than the others, to the point that the other wolves around it whimpered in submission just by its presence. Still, Izuku raised his blade towards the creature, unbothered. But, before he attacked the new foe, he paused, considering his options. Eyes settling on the beast's spikes, a plan formed in the boy's mind. He sheathed his sword and charged up his semblance to an even higher degree, causing the lighting on his limbs to glow bright enough to blind a person and for even his veins to start to glow from the power. When Izuku raced towards the beast, the wolf didn't seem threatened. Instead, like the others before it, it raised its claw over its head to strike Izuku down with the full force of its body. Yet, Izuku persisted in his charge. As the beast threw down its claw, inches away from the shorter boy's face, he changed his direction by the slightest degree, just enough to narrowly avoid the wolf's attack, yet remained close enough to reach out and snatch the wolf's elbow spike with his gloved hand, using his momentum to yank it high over the beast's head. Just as the boy predicted, the wolf flew up into the air with the boy. Once he was high above the treetops, the boy used his other hand to flick the air beside him, adding a spin to both him and the wolf and giving an extra burst of strength to the boy's throw when he proceeded to launch the wolf back towards the ground with all the strength he could. Although the boy couldn't see the impact, he determined what happened when he landed in a small crater of dirt, dust, and smoke, along with the sight of the remaining wolves all sprinting away in fear for their own survival. Seeing his foes flee, Izuku sighed and reached into his pocket to pull out the paper he found before. In his ear, Young asked, "So, did you find what you were looking for? I heard gunfire. You better not be having fun without me." Pursing his lips, Izuku assured, "Don't worry, it was just some Beowulfs." "And I'm not sure about what I found," admitted Izuku, tracing his fingers along the words of the card. "It feels like I've come across more questions than answers." "Right, what does that mean?" But Izuku remained silent, unable to answer that question and too caught up with his own questions racing through his mind, whirling around like a tornado. But with all the threateningness of a snowball starting to roll down a mountain taller than the skies and straight towards his house of composure. Pink trailer chapter text. As the light flurries of snowflakes touched down on the open plaza, a girl with long, flowing silver-tipped chocolate hair and soft brown eyes walked towards the center of the plaza. In each hand, she carried a knife with a tube of different colored dust raised to strike any enemy in front of her. Speaking of which, the winds around the girl started to pick up, alerting the girl. The chilly winds grew strong and stronger, blocking out the rest of the world until only the white winds remained. And yet, none of the winds drew any closer towards the brunette, keeping her in the center of the storm. Still, that didn't mean it was safe, for, from the winds, several white-furred Beowulfs emerged, growling and frothing at the mouth at the sight of their new targets. Spotting the new enemy's approach, the girl sheathed one of her daggers, keeping the other one in hand. Instantly, one of the wolves charged towards her, but she ducked under the attacker, grazing her empty hand against the creature's fur. Straightening up, she turned back to see the wolf rise into the air, helpless to fight back. With her other hand, she threw her dagger into the creature's head, causing it to dissolve into dust that rejoined the rest of the snow in the winds. But the girl didn't celebrate, for she had to spin a complete 180 on her heel to face two more enemies creeping on her back. Leaping back, she raised up the same hand from before, causing the palm of her glove to glow a dark purple. The bottom of the hilt of her dagger glowed the same purple as it shot up back into her hand. Pulling out another dagger for her open hand, she switched both hilts so that the clear tubes glowed a bright orange-red shade. As the wolves picked up speed towards her, she returned the gesture, meeting her attackers in the middle. However, right when one of them swiped for her head, she leapt onto the creature's paw, sending her flying high into the air. While flying, she threw down her daggers into the creature's backs. This time, 2 explosions rang out, destroying not only the creatures, but also the pavement underneath them. Landing in a roll, the girl hopped to her feet, recalled her daggers once more, and turned to face her newest enemy. As she struck down wolf after wolf, a memory emerged in her mind. "You want to go to Beacon?" "Why?" The girl's older sister, a white-haired, well-kept woman in a military uniform named Winter, questioned, perplexed. Crossing her arms, the woman began, "𝗂𝗄𝐻𝐿, if this is just because Weiss wants to go to Beacon, then it isn't," refused 𝗂𝗄𝐿 with a sharp shake of her head. "Well, I won't deny that isn't a small part of it, but that's not the main reason. Remember those visions I've been having? The hallucinations. I thought I told you to not confuse imaginary why they're not imaginary," refuted 𝗂𝗄𝐿, her tongue as sharp and certain as the steel daggers on her hips. "Believe me, I can tell my dreams from reality. But these visions aren't dreams. They're more like, I don't know, like memories of a previous life or something." Intrigued, Winter straightened up in her seat. "Like reincarnation?" "𝗂𝗄𝐿, I hope I don't have to point out how ridiculous that sounds. I know, and I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't experienced them myself. But sometimes I'm doing something and the scenery around me." 𝗂𝗄𝐿 paused, trying to find the right word. "Changes, transforms into something completely new." Raising a skeptical brow, Winter echoed, "Changes? Changes how? Like?" 𝗂𝗄𝐿 waved her hands around, trying to describe the bizarre experiences she's lived through. With hesitant yet definite words, she elaborated, "Like in training. When I'm fighting the Grimm, I'll blink and be in an empty city fighting 𝗧𝗧sized, green robots with numbers on them, surrounded by people with strange outfits and strange body shapes, like having engines in their legs or being able to shoot a laser from their stomach at that." Winter scoffed in disbelief, but allowed the younger girl to continue. "Fighting alongside me, but, like, not as allies, nor like enemies. It felt like we were competing over something. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. And I was fighting like it was the most important thing in the world to me." 𝗂𝗄𝐿 paused, remembering how that vision ended with her being buried under rubble while, in reality, Beowulfs tackled her on all sides. But she perked up again, enthusiastically going into another example. "Oh, or like when I'm using my semblance to soar through the air, I see myself not looking down on the manor, nor Atlas, nor even Mantle, but somewhere else entirely. A building in a city that looked kind of like a less modernized Atlas. The building was destroyed, though, and there are bodies and injured people everywhere. I was carrying a man in some sort of suit. I kept saying that I could save him, that I could help. But he told me not to. He said, if this is the price for changing the future, then so be it." Looking back, I have no idea what he meant, but at the time, I understood it perfectly, and it broke my heart and soul. She trailed off, choking on her own words and shallow breaths. Without realizing it, her cheeks had cooled while her eyes started to burn like someone set them on fire. Frantically, 𝗂𝗄𝐿 tried to wipe away the tears, to maintain some semblance of composure in front of her older sister, but every time she wiped a tear away, 2 more took its place. The guilt for the man she never met weighed on her chest like a bag of rocks. Seeing her sister's distraught state, Winter pushed herself out of her seat, walked over to her sister, and grabbed the brunette's wrist. "All right, I get your point, 𝗂𝗄𝐿. I may be skeptical about a world where people can fire lasers from their stomachs or have engines built into their legs, but considering we live in a world where people can have cattails or robotic limbs, I won't say it's outside the realm of possibility." Still, letting go of her sister's wrist, Winter stepped back to lean against her desk, crossing her arms once more. "I don't know what this has to do with you going to Beacon. If you believe the answer lies in you becoming a huntress, surely you can do that by attending Atlas Academy in a year." "No," 𝗂𝗄𝐿 refused, the last of her tears drying away as the fire in her eyes returned. "It's not just that. There's something in my soul telling me that the answers lie in Vale, at Beacon. It's not just becoming a huntress, but something waits for me at that school. Something that burns just as strongly as these visions do in my mind. I have to go with Weiss. Back in the present, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 struck down another Beowulf in time to see 5 more emerge from the winds simultaneously, surrounding the girl on all sides. Narrowing her gaze, the girl eyed her new enemies, strategizing how to fight them all off without risking being overwhelmed from every angle. Plan in mind, the girl sheathed her daggers and, instead, spun the wrist cuffs of her gloves, causing them to glow orange instead of purple. Pushing off the ground with her back foot, the girl sped towards one of the wolves, but, rather than attack it, she ducked under the creature and ran her hands along the broken cement pieces underneath him instead. A growl alerted her in time to see another wolf leaping towards her, but she rolled underneath the beast, repeating the same process on the new area. She continued this, narrowly avoiding attack after attack while keeping her body and hands close to the ground. However, as she drew too close to the edge of the storm, another wolf appeared from the storm, striking the girl directly in the chest and sending her flying back across the cement. Luckily, she adjusted herself midair enough to land with a roll, but the attack still left a faint burning sensation in her chest. Pushing herself back onto her feet, she smirked, knowing that she was still in control of this fight. She pressed her fingertips together and spoke a single word, release. All over the area, the pieces of rubble that 𝗂𝗧𝗄 touched, now coated in orange dust, all started to fall, exploding upon contact with the ground, covering the ground in a layer of smoke and ash. Luckily, a couple pieces landed on 2 of the wolves, exploding them into snow, but the other 4 Beowulfs caught onto the trick and managed to dodge around the makeshift falling mines. Still, this opening was all 𝗂𝗧𝗄 needed. The remaining wolves sniffed and scoured the area, but found no sign of the girl. Unbeknownst to them, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 floated high above the arena, her fingertips barely an inch apart, ready to press together at the right moment. She pulled out her daggers and pointed them downwards, using the curve of the hilts to keep her fingertips free. Once the Beowulfs moved directly underneath her, she pressed her fingertips together and gravity returned to her with a rushed blow, like a punch to the gut. Upward winds from her fall boomed in her ears, but she ignored them, instead throwing down her hands from over her head, digging them into 2 of the wolves' skulls. Unfortunately, one of the 2 remaining wolves struck her in the side, sending her straight into the other Beowulf. But 𝗂𝗧𝗄 bent down and touched the bottom of her heel, allowing her to instead rise up over the wolf rather than into it, giving her the perfect opening to stab the Beowulf in the back of its neck. As the body dissolved into snow underneath her, she focused her gaze on the final wolf. Snarling, the Beowulf charged straight towards her, claws raised to finish her off. Smirking, she ducked under the slash and used the beast's momentum against it, causing it to dig itself into her other dagger, killing it. Letting out a deep breath that she didn't realize she was holding, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 sheathed her daggers and looked past the dying winds towards the entrance to the manor, where Winter watched the whole fight play out. I believe I can be of assistance with that. A new voice spoke up, catching the 2 girls off guard. Instantly, the 2 spun on their heels to see an older man in a black suit and silver hair enter the room. With each step, his black and silver, futuristic yet medieval staff clicked against the marble floor. While 𝗂𝗧𝗄 tilted her head in perplexity, Winter shot to her feet, recognizing the man immediately. Professor Ozpin, sir. I didn't know you were visiting Atlas. Well, the older man smiled, crossing his arms over his cane. A tip from an old colleague of mine came in, telling me about a talented girl wanting to attend my academy a year ahead of others her age. I thought I might as well come meet her myself. Looking down at 𝗂𝗧𝗄, who stiffened at the sudden attention, the man held out a hand to her. It's a pleasure to meet you. You must be 𝗂𝗧𝗄. Why, yes, sir, nodded 𝗂𝗧𝗄, shaking the man's hand. I hope you don't mind that I overheard your conversation from the hall. I must say, it sounds like quite the story. Frowning, 𝗂𝗧𝗄's gaze drifted downwards and she tucked her legs together. I'm guessing you probably don't believe me either, right? On the contrary, Ozpin corrected, making 𝗂𝗧𝗄's head jerk upwards, her eyes glistening with hope and surprise. We live a world of monsters that feast on negativity and warriors that use magic-like abilities to fight them. In a world of so many possibilities, your story seems far from impossible. Now, 𝗵𝗃𝗁, you certainly have the talents to fit in my school, so here I ask you. Straightening up, Ozpin tilted the tip of his cane towards the brunette. Do you truly believe coming to my school will lead you down the path of answers, and are you willing to face the obstacles and dangers along the way? Without hesitation, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 agreed, I am. Changing out of her combat outfit, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 spoke, seemingly to no one in particular. I know you're there, you know. From the shadows, a boy with platinum blonde hair and silver-gray eyes stepped into the light, his hands lingering near his hips, where his rainbow belt rested. You were reckless with training today. Scoffing, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 slipped her daggers onto the belt of her silvery blue dress. You're not my teacher, 𝗧𝗏𝗏. What are you even doing here? You know why, replied the boy, sharp. Annoyed, 𝗂𝗧𝗄 turned around and brushed past him and out into the main hall. I don't need a bodyguard. I can take care of myself." Behind her, Nito called out, "If you want to go to Beacon, you do." At that, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 froze up. Quickly, she spun around to finally face the boy. "Seriously? You're coming to Beacon with me?" Rather than reply, the man shifted his hand from his weapon to his hip, looking down at 𝗂𝗧𝗏 with a smug smirk. That, in itself, was enough of an answer to the girl. Furious, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 stomped up to the boy. "No, no, no. I'm not going to Beacon with a bodyguard. I want to discover answers for myself." She poked the boy in the chest. "Be a powerful huntress on my own. Be able to prove myself on my own terms." She poked him again so hard that he had to take a step back to not lose balance. "I'm aware," Nito replied, unfazed by the girl being in his face. "That's why I offered to go. Try to think of the bigger picture, huh? I know it's difficult for a spoiled princess like you, but try. Wouldn't you rather only have one guard at Beacon rather than eyes on you all the time like you'd have in Atlas?" At his words, 𝗂𝗧𝗏's gaze softened and she glanced away, unable to confess that he had a point. Sighing, Nito's hands dropped to his sides. "My job is to keep an eye on you and keep you safe. Whatever you choose to do from there is no business of mine." With that, he brushed past her and started to walk down the large, empty hallway. Once he reached the end of the hall, he turned back to her. "And for your information, I'm not just attending Beacon for you. There's something I'm looking for in 𝗲𝗀 as well." The determined look in his eyes caused another vision to draw itself to the surface of 𝗂𝗧𝗏's mind. One of the same boy with a much more overconfident smirk but an almost proud glimmer in his eyes, waiting for her outside of some sort of waiting room. Something in the back of her mind told her that it was after some sort of battle. One, based on the disappointment swelling in her chest, she lost. The boy, instead of his ivory black suit and silver, wore a blue and white jumpsuit with the letters UA incorporated into the white stripes of the design. With his hands in his pants pockets, he addressed 𝗂𝗧𝗏. "Congrats on the battle out there." At first, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 pursed her lips, thinking that he was mocking her for her terrible loss, but the calm look in his eyes and the soft tone of his voice told her of his sincerity. Confused, she asked, "Why are you congratulating me? I thought you hated everyone in the class." But the boy shook his head, as if expecting her question. "Oh, I do. Your overconfidence and self-assurance just because of a single bad incident and some lucky breaks pisses me off. But I always respect someone who tries to win a fight using something other than brute force. The strong ones may tend to have the advantage in battle, but it's the clever ones who often come out on top." Frowning, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 reminded him, "But I lost. You were within millimeters of victory. You proved half an arena of pro heroes that you had a better chance against that moron than any of them thought. On my way here, even the moron admitted respect for you. In a way, that's a victory in itself." He walked up to 𝗂𝗧𝗏 and smiled down at her. Not a smirk, but a rare, genuine smile. "Stop being like the short-sighted heroes out there and focus on the bigger picture. So you didn't win. What matters is that you left an impact. Focus on that rather than dwelling in regret." With that, he walked past her back towards the stands, and 𝗂𝗧𝗏 watched him go, a surprised yet thankful look in her eyes, as if she was seeing the boy in a whole new light. Snapping back to reality, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 frowned. Was Nito a part of that strange past life? Could he be having visions too? Is that what he was talking about when he said he was looking for something in 𝗲𝗀? Did he have the same gut feeling that she did? Rather than voice any of these questions out loud, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 pocketed them in her mind for a later date. For now, all she could do is prepare for her move to Beacon and hope that she's right, that something, or someone, will give her the answers she's looking for. Izuku Midoriya always found himself drawn to the superhero section of the comic book section in the Dusk to Dawn shop he and his sisters visited. He didn't know whether it was the uniqueness of the worlds they lived in, the similarities between their creative powers to semblances, or the true-natured heroes in the center of it all, risking everything for the sake of saving everyone. The license in his back pocket burned like a hot iron. As he skimmed through his reread of one of his favorite stories, one of childhood friends transforming into bittersweet rivals into partners in crime, his eyes lingered on one panel. It showed the two rivals staring each other down, with a villain standing behind one of them, wrapping their hand around one of the friend's neck to keep them from escaping. Based on the blurry background on the villain's half of the panel, it looked like some sort of teleportation or portal power, but that wasn't what drew Izuku's attention. No, his gaze enraptured itself on the other main character, a young girl with a naive gaze and bright smile, except now that smile was contorted into a horrified frown, staring across the gap at her friend. Her hand reached out to her rival, but the distance was too far for her to cover. Even though the girl's body was covered in cuts and bruises, her eyes were completely fixed on the other two. He didn't know why, but whenever he reached this point in the story, his heart clenched so tightly that he thought he was having a heart attack. Tears pricked his eyes, even though he didn't know their origin. His breath shallowed, and his hands gripped the comic book so tight that his knuckles turned white. "No, he's got, come on. We can't let them leave." "Well, isn't that a tragedy? Poor little, always a little too late, aren't you? Too late to stop everything from being taken away from you." No, Stay back. 𝗧𝗑𝐬𝐽 slammed the comic book shut, the sound of the pages slapping together ringing throughout the store. Panting for breath, 𝗧𝗑𝐽 stared down at the closed book with wide, glossy eyes. His arms and legs shook, threatening to send him to the floor. What in brother's name was that? Why did another vision come to him now? And why did that one feel so powerful, especially since that was his most broken and blurry vision so far? Nothing more than cracked voices and blurry images flashing through his mind like watching a video on a broken scroll. Before he could ponder that further, the sounds of a person shouting followed by the distinct sound of glass breaking caught the boy's attention. Switching the comic for his sword, he crept towards the front of the store, where he saw a group of dazed, sword-wielding men in matching red and black suits and sunglasses wearing the same confused expression, their eyes fixed on the broken window rather than noticing the boy's arrival. In the center of the men stood a red-headed man in a red-striped black dark gray bowler hat, white trench coat and hooked black cane. Unlike the others, he glared at the broken window with pure annoyance, though he looked equally dazed by the sudden event. 𝗧𝗑𝐽, meanwhile, didn't feel an ounce of surprise at the broken window, already suspecting what he'd find outside. Sure enough, his younger sister, a black-haired girl with dyed red tips holding a mechanical scythe twice her size and standing over one of the goons while broken glass surrounded them all over the cement. The girl smirked like she won the lottery, spinning her scythe overhead before aiming it at the other goons as if she did it on a daily basis. The bowler hat man tilted the cigar in his mouth before taking it out of his mouth with his free hand, staring at 𝗧𝗑𝐽's sister, Ruby Rose. Okay. He looked at the goons, who were still standing around. Get her. As the goons rushed out of the shop, either through the window or the front door, Ruby's silver eyes looked past them and locked with 𝗧𝗑𝐽. Her smirk changed from one of pride to one of acknowledgement when 𝗧𝗑𝐽 nodded to answer her silent question. Jumping into action, Ruby sped towards 3 of the goons and sliced at them with her scythe, causing them to jump back out of the way, where 𝗧𝗑𝐽 sped into place to take them down. He sliced one in the back while 2 others charged at him from either side, their swords raised. In one swift movement, he parried one blade and pushed off of it to flip over the other goon, kicking him in the back of the head. The third guy tried to shoot at 𝗧𝗑𝐽, but he sped out of the way and tried to strike the guy, only for him to block it with his sword. However, the extra strength from 𝗧𝗑𝐽's semblance still sent the guy stumbling back, giving 𝗧𝗑𝐽 the opening to stab his sword in the ground and use it to prop himself up to kick the guy straight in the face. Nearby, Ruby stuck her scythe into the ground and spun over the handle to dodge a swing from another goon and followed through with a double-footed kick of her own, sending the guy to the ground before she crushed him onto the back end of her scythe's head. A second guy opened fire on her, but she combined her own speed semblance with the barrel of her weapon to zigzag across the street and spin her scythe straight into the goon's face like a baseball bat, sending him flying back towards the red-headed guy, who stepped outside during the fight. Looking between the unconscious men and the 2 kids, the man muttered, "Worth every penny, truly you were." Taking his cigar out of his mouth, the man approached the kids, announcing, "Well, Red and Green, I think we can all say this has been an eventful evening." He dropped his cigar to the ground, crushing it under his cane. He lifted the end of his cane straight towards the siblings as he finished, and, as much as I'd love to stick around, I'm afraid the end of the cane popped open, revealing its true identity as the barrel of a gun, is where we must part ways. In an instant, 𝗧𝗑𝐽 realized what was about to happen and used his semblance to jump high into the sky, breaking the cement under his feet in the process, out of the range of the incoming explosive bullet that the man fired at them. Landing back on the ground with a roll, 𝗧𝗑𝐽 sighed in relief when he saw that Ruby managed to dodge the bullet as well. Unfortunately, as the clearing of the smoke soon revealed, that choice to dodge the bullet gave the bowler hat man the opportunity to escape. Narrowing his gaze, 𝗧𝗑𝐽 scanned the area for where the man ran to there. Ruby pointed towards a distant building, where they saw the man climbing up the ladder of a fire escape towards the roof. Without hesitating, Ruby sprinted after the man. 𝗧𝗑𝐽 stepped into a running position, but he paused and looked back at the shopkeeper, who stumbled out the door. "Are you going to be okay?" Looking from the men and back up at the boy, the man nodded, a grateful expression on his face. Sheathing his sword, 𝗧𝗑𝐽 turned and sped after Ruby, leaping off of the cement to close the distance between him and the others. He reached out and grabbed the mid-rung of the ladder and pulled himself up, using his propulsion to launch onto the roof, where Ruby was already staring down the bowler hat man. Keeping his cane pointed at the 2 siblings, the man tipped his hat down like a mocked bow. "You 2 sure are persistent, I'll give you that." Behind him, a giant metal airship with the doors of its hangar flew up into view. As it rose up past the rooftop, the man jumped back, landing cleanly on the ship without ever breaking his gaze from the children. Straightening back up to a full standing position, the man pulled a red crystal out of his pocket. "End of the line, you 2. Eyes widening, 𝗧𝗑𝐽 realized, a fire crystal? That triggered the 2 into action. 𝗧𝗑𝐽 powered up his semblance to a stronger capacity, causing the lightning in his body to glow brighter, while Ruby pointed the barrel of her scythe at a downwards angle in front of her. They both lurched back and sank, but the edge of the explosion still caught them, sending them flying farther than intended, right over the edge of the rooftop. Acting quickly, Izuku grabbed the rung of the fire escape ladder with one hand, catching Ruby by the hood with his other. Using his strength, he threw the girl back onto the roof, following shortly after her. To their surprise, when they rejoined the fight, another woman stood on the roof, raising a whipping cane up towards the airship. Her stern, focused gaze locked itself on the target, not even flinching at the arrival of the two students. Her purple and black cape flapped in the winds of the airship's engines, adding to her aura of power and strength. Pushing back her glasses, she raised her cane over her shoulder, summoning a purple glow on the tip of it. She flicked down her cane, using the rubble from the explosion as weapons to fire straight towards the ship, damaging its side but failing to knock it out of the air. Seeing the blonde woman, Roman's breath caught in his throat and he rushed out of view, likely to get back up. Seconds later, two figures stepped into view. A woman with fiery orange eyes and wearing glass heels that clicked against the metal so loudly that the trio heard it from the roof. Each clink like a shockwave of dread that sparked shivers down the two kids' spines. Izuku especially tensed up upon seeing the woman, some instinct in the back of his mind warning him to not underestimate this new arrival. And yet, in spite of that, his attention drew itself to the other new arrival, a man in an orange-brown trench coat, black top hat, and white and black mask like the ones used for drama. With a loud, boisterous voice, the man exclaimed, Now, it's quite rude to ruin a triumphant exit with your novice acting, is it not? The curtains are falling, madams. But the show strangely, the man cut himself off as his mask tilted in Izuku's direction. The man's confident tone shifted to a surprised yet knowing chuckle as he lifted his arms outwards. Now this certainly wasn't in the script. Though, given your track record, I shouldn't be surprised. What was this man talking about? Izuku's track record. But he hasn't done anything except fight Grim. Did this man confuse him with someone else? But he sounded so certain and, at the same time, so caught off guard at Izuku's presence. Without realizing it, Izuku stumbled back with eyes as wide as saucers, his blade lowering towards the ground from his grip dissipating into nothingness. His knees buckled underneath him and his ears started to ring, blocking out a worried cry from Ruby and an unreadable glance in his direction from the blonde. Sadly, the masked man also noticed Izuku's reaction, for he lowered his arms back down to his sides. Your acting skills are so subpar, I can read your truth all over your face. You truly don't remember me, huh? Now that's a downright shame. Though, I can't deny it won't make for an interesting spin on this show. Annoyed with the senseless chatter, the other woman grabbed the man by the shoulder and yanked him back into the darkness, allowing herself to approach the edge of the ship in his place. With her other hand, she spun her wrist, causing several trails of fire to run down her red sleeve and combining into a fireball in her hand, which she shot straight at the trio. However, the woman raised her cane again, causing a circle formed from specks of gravity dust to form in front of them like a shield, blocking the blow. However, the fireball scattered around the trio like glass, which heated up into an explosion, which, luckily, the trio all managed to dodge once again. Ruby and Izuku stayed back while the blonde woman stepped forward and spun her cane around her in a swirl, taking control of the new rubble pieces and combining them together into a giant spear, firing straight at the ship like a harpoon. Unfazed, the fiery woman summoned several more fireballs, burning up several rubble pieces and breaking the spear apart. The remaining pieces all swarmed the ship, surrounding it on all sides like tendrils. The separate tentacles of ruin stabbed themselves into the ship, puncturing holes into the metal surface even if it destroyed the tentacles in the process. Letting out a low growl, the woman crossed her arms in front of her, causing several circles of fire to appear around her torso before they shot out in all directions, turning the remaining rubble to ash. Realizing that the blonde woman was now out of weaponry and the ship was flying away, Ruby and Izuku exchanged a silent look of understanding. Ruby spun her scythe and pressed down on the switch in its handle, transforming it into its gun mode. At the same time, Izuku bent his knees to leap after the ship. In his mind, he tried to calculate how much of his semblance to use. He still can only use a maximum of 15%. But will that damage the rooftop too much and send his allies falling? But as usual, 5% won't close the distance fast enough either. Making up his mind, Izuku charged his power to 10% and leapt after the airship before either of the girls could stop him, reaching out as far as his arms could stretch. He held his breath as he barely managed to grip onto the edge of the airship's cargo area. With the woman preoccupied blocking shots from Ruby, Izuku used the opportunity to try and pull himself onto the ship. Now, it's pretty criminal for outsiders to come onto the actor's stage, aren't you aware? You'll have to be taught a lesson. Only for him to realize that, in his spur-of-the-moment decision, he forgot about the other person standing in the cargo bay. Horrified, Izuku looked up to see the masked man standing over him, reaching out an open, mechanical hand towards Izuku's head. Reacting quickly, Izuku spun his sword to point the barrel downwards and fired it. The recoil combined with his semblance, allowing him to narrowly fly back out of reach of the man and the plane entirely. He shifted his position into a side roll back on the rooftop where the other two girls watched the plane leave. Helpless to stop it now, lowering her cane, the woman marched over to Izuku. "Boy, that masked man seemed like he knew you. Who was he?" Izuku stared at where the plane was moments before, his eyes still wide from the whole event. "I don't know." An image flashed in his mind of him riding on a taller man's back, wrapped up in the man's many limbs like a cocoon. Nearby were two girls, a brunette with a cut on her shoulder and a green-haired girl standing like a frog about to jump, and a bi-colored boy carrying another unconscious boy on his back. All of them shared the same vengeful and surprised glares towards a figure in the sky, the masked man from the plane. At the vision, Izuku winced and curled in on himself. Some subconscious part of him whispered that he was wrong, that his answer was a lie. But Izuku shook the whispers off. He's never seen that man before, visions or no. Right, seeing the conflicting thoughts storm in Izuku's mind. All revealed through his eyes like spotless windows. The woman sighed, "In spite of my better judgment, I'll believe you, for now. Regardless, you better come with me." She turned and glared down at Ruby, who's been staring at the woman with an awestruck, fangirling gaze. "Both of you." Before they knew it, the two kids found themselves in a dark room, sitting on the same side of a silver table and metal chairs that scraped against the ground. A single, flickering light hung overhead, and Izuku saw a window of one-way glass against the wall to the right of him. Sitting in this room, Izuku felt goosebumps crawl against his skin, which he didn't know whether it was due to nerves or the stagnant cold air of the room, encircling them like a mother lecturing a child. The woman scolded, "I hope you two realize your actions tonight will not be taken lightly. Just because you may not be associated with criminals does not mean you shouldn't understand that you still put yourselves and others in grave danger." "They started it," Ruby defended. But Izuku whispered, "Sis, I don't think that excuse works here," which earned him a light shove from the red-hooded girl. Ignoring their banter, the woman walked around to the other side of the table, messing with her tablet. Once she reached the middle, she stopped walking. "If it were up to me, you'd be sent home with a pat on the back." The two kids lit up, thinking they were receiving a prideful compliment from an actual, professional huntress, and a slap on the wrist. The woman furiously slapped down her cane on the table. The ringing echoed by the room so loudly that it made both kids jump back in their chairs. Ruby frowned, scared of the threat, but Izuku still beamed, happy to receive any form of compliment from a huntress. Sighing, the woman lowered her cane and slipped it back on the loop of her outfit. "But there's someone here who would like to meet you." Before either kid could ask who she was talking about, the door behind the woman swung open and the blonde stepped to the side to reveal a silver-haired man in a dark green suit. In one hand, he carried a plate of cookies and in the other he carried a cup of something with the symbol of veil on it. Right away, Izuku straightened up. He didn't have to know who the man was, though he did know, everyone did, to know that he commanded respect. His gentle appearance appeared warm and inviting, but his eyes stood out from the rest. They were darkened and sharp, with years of experience and knowledge hidden behind their clouded windows and their golden irises acting like guide rails, pointing his gaze towards the target of his focus, so sharp that he could pierce his target's surface and gaze into the depths of their soul to see every strength and every flaw within them. And right now, those targets were Izuku and Ruby. Walking up to the table, the man greeted the two teens. Ruby rose and Izuku Midoriya rose. Setting down the items on the table, he focused his attention on Ruby, leaning towards the girl's face. "You have silver eyes." A wave of unease washed over Izuku. This guy was clearly making his sister uncomfortable, and Izuku wanted to voice as much, but the power radiating off of this man stole the words off of Izuku's tongue, leaving him speechless. Ruby, equally at a loss for words, choked out a nervous, Straightening up, the man gestured to the security footage of the fight on the tablet the woman held. "So, where did you two learn to do this?" Signal Academy. Izuku chimed in, still struggling to recover from his overwhelmed state. "They taught you two to use some of the most dangerous weapons ever designed?" The man questioned, skeptical. "Well," Ruby corrected, regaining her composure, "it was really one teacher in particular." Adding on, Izuku commented, "He's a big inspiration for us." Humming at that answer, the man pushed the plate of cookies in their direction, which Ruby started to inhale like water after weeks in the desert. Izuku tried to reach for a cookie, but Ruby slapped his hand away and pulled the plate closer, earning a chuckle from the man and a roll of eyes from the blonde woman. As Ruby ate, the man pointed out, "You see, I believe I know the man you're talking about. A dusty old crow. You met our uncle," blurted out Izuku, far louder than he intended. Embarrassed, the boy threw his hands over his mouth and shrunk in his seat, face bright red and burning. Taking over, Ruby elaborated, like an excited puppy due to the sugar rush flowing through her body. "Our Uncle Kiro is a teacher at Signal. We were absolute garbage before he took us under his wing. Now we're all like She started swinging her arms around and making sounds like some kind of karate star out of an old movie. So it seems, the man spoke up, catching Ruby off guard and causing her to hit 𝗧𝗑𝗧 in the back of the head. Taking a sip of his drink, the man asked, "And what would two adorable kids such as yourselves doing at a school designed to train warriors?" This time, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 took back over, his hands clenching clumps of his pants between his fingers. "We want to be a huntsman and huntress. No, we need to become one. At least," 𝗧𝗑𝗧 lowered his gaze, his eyes glazing over, "I do. Need." The man glanced over at the brunette, surprised. "Now, that's quite a statement. What do you mean?" 𝗧𝗑𝗧's tone lowered, far more serious and distant, as if his mind were somewhere else as he spoke. "I can't explain it, but fighting Grimm, protecting the kingdom, saving those in need. It all makes sense. I've dreamed of becoming a huntsman since I was little. I've wanted to help people." A young boy's eyes flickered open to the sounds of growling. Pushing himself up in clothes far too large for his body, the boy looked around the small crater he laid in, with no memories save a name lingering in his mind. All around him, dozens of shadowy creatures 4 times his size surrounded him like a shark circles its prey. Desperately, the boy tried to find a way out, but his dazed state left no room for anything but terror to form in his mind. To save others in need like I was saved seconds before the creatures pounced. A figure appeared like an angel from above, wielding a scythe like the Grim Reaper and striking down all of the monsters in an instant, never once scratching the child. In a few seconds, he turned the army of monsters to dust in the wind, like the creatures were nothing more than a bad dream. However, right when the man dropped his guard and turned towards 2 other children watching the scene, a blonde girl dragging a smaller, black-haired girl in a wagon, a monster bigger than all the others appeared behind the boy, reaching down to cut the boy into pieces with its claw. Too mortified to think straight, the boy squeezed his eyes shut, preparing for the end, only for the sound of metal cutting through fur and bone to ring out instead of pain like the boy expected. Eyes shooting open, he saw the monster hanging over him with a giant sword sticking straight through its torso. On the other end of the sword, the man smiled down at him, asking, "You all right, kiddo? What's your name?" Looking up at his savior, the boy answered, "I, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 𝗵𝗃. Because that's the right thing to do," finished the boy, locking eyes with the elderly man. "No, it is what I'm meant to do. Nothing else makes sense." Beside him, Ruby looked up at her brother with glimmers in her eyes, like she was seeing her brother in a whole new light. Of course, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 never actually confessed his real reason to be a huntsman out loud. He didn't know what about this man finally caused him to speak his mind. But finally confessing his reason felt like someone removed a weight in his lungs that he never realized was there. Intrigued, the man nodded in approval. "I see. That's a good answer, young man. Now then, a follow-up question. Do either of you know who I am?" Both nodded, with Ruby replying, "You're Professor 𝗂𝗵𝗲. You're the headmaster of Beacon." Satisfied, the man smiled. "Would you two like to come to my school?" Leaning forward on the table, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 answered, his eyes burning with confidence and his tone thick with certainty more than anything. Leaning back in his own chair, the man shrugged. "Well, okay. I've decided to allow both of you to attend. This year." "What? This year?" But neither 𝗧𝗑𝗧 nor Ruby were old enough. 𝗧𝗑𝗧 still had another year at Signal, and Ruby had 2. Why was he allowing them to join early? Just because they managed to take down a few goons? But, rather than voice any of this, 𝗧𝗑𝗧 decided to not look a gift horse in the mouth and instead grinned widely. "Thank you, sir." I can't believe my 2 baby siblings are coming to Beacon with me," exclaimed Yang, squeezing her 2 siblings in a bone-crushing hug. If 𝗧𝗑𝗧 wasn't already breathless from the situation, any breath left has escaped him now. In a similar state, Ruby choked out, "Yang can't breathe." That caused Yang to drop her siblings, stepping back to squeal like a child seeing a puppy. "Sorry, I'm just so excited that both of my siblings are coming to Beacon with me." She looked between her siblings and noticed their grim composures. Ruby shifted back and forth in place, her weapon bouncing on her hips and her arms tucked close to her chest. While she wore a smile, it had a nervous edge to it, and her silver eyes looked more like storm clouds waiting for thunder to strike. 𝗧𝗑𝗧 also tucked his shoulders in, his eyes darting around the room, but never focusing on anything in particular. The glassy look in his emerald eyes made it clear that his mind was anywhere but in the airship with his sibling. He picked at the edges of his black gloves, causing tiny tears to form. Young's smile dropped. "I thought you two would be more excited." 𝗧𝗑𝗧 spoke, grounding himself enough to answer, though his eyes stayed glossed over. "It's just complicated." "Complicated?" Yang echoed, not understanding. Taking over, Ruby elaborated. "We were moved ahead, Yang. 𝗧𝗑𝗧 by 1 year and me by 2. She launched into a long explanation about being worried of standing out or people looking at her with higher expectations than she can handle. But 𝗧𝗑𝗧 found himself tuning her out, instead looking around the area they stood in. The 3 of them stood on a giant airship filled to the brim with Beacon students of both human and faunus alike. Some groups talked to each other in hushed voices, sounding everywhere from excited to nervous to competitive, while other students stood on their own, eyeing the others in the shape as either a challenge or a threat. Noticeably, once the groups formed, very few of them interacted with other groups, like an invisible divider kept them all separated. Izuku's eyes drifted to the holographic screens, where the newswoman narrated, the robbery was led by nefarious criminal, 𝗵𝗃. Police shots of the bowler hat from the event the other night appeared on screen. And while he lacked said hat, Izuku recognized the man right away by the sense of superiority the man silently conveyed through his presence alone, who continues to evade authorities. If you have any information of his whereabouts, please contact the Vale Police Department. As the news switched topics to discuss a faunus rights protest turning violent by the White Fang, Izuku mumbled to himself, they didn't mention the other two. Why? Beside him, Ruby rested a hand on her brother's arm, grounding him. Are you still thinking about that night, Izuku? Yeah, Izuku confessed, shameful. He turned his gaze towards the window, looking out towards the wide stretches of city below. I know it was just a criminal trying to mess with me, and it was probably nothing, but what if those visions weren't just his imagination? What if they were something more than that? Was that why he felt a connection to that license he found in the woods? Why sometimes he thought or felt things that didn't make sense? What if he really was forgetting something? What if he's missing something? Some big piece of this puzzle that's remaining out of his reach. What if that criminal was a part of it? The key, the answer? Hey now, young cut-in. Wrapping her arm around Izuku and yanking him out of his tangent. From what that video showed, that guy definitely looked like he was trying to get in your head. He probably confused you for someone else. You do have a plain-looking appearance after all. Hey, Izuku winced, his face pained but not denying what he already knew to be true. On the other side of him, Ruby cut in, we've been with you all the time, so when would you have even had the chance to go off to live a double life? Oh, she perked up and spun around so that she stood in front of him, poking him in the chest with each next word out of her mouth. But if you really are out living an exciting double life, you better take me with you, got it? I won't let you go have amazing adventures without me. Smiling fondly, Izuku grabbed Ruby's wrist to stop the pokes. Sure, Ruby, but you have a point. I'm with you too all the time, so if I was living another life, then you'd know about it. While he said that mostly to calm Ruby down, he also said it for himself, dismissing any doubts in his mind. That's right, he spent all his life with the people right beside him. His sisters, their dad, and Uncle Kuro are the reason Izuku is who he is now. Whatever these visions are, whoever that criminal might have been talking about, whatever all that means, it doesn't matter anymore. Izuku likes who he is now, so why should he stress about changing it? A familiar voice spoke up, drawing him out of his thoughts. Hello and welcome to Beacon. The three teens spun around towards one of the many holograms, where they saw the blonde woman from the other night standing there, with a polite smile on her face rather than the serious scowl Ruby and Izuku saw before. In a kind, welcoming tone, the woman announced, My name is Glinda Goodwitch. You are among a privileged few who have received the honor of being selected to attend this prestigious academy. Our world is experiencing an incredible time of peace, and as future huntsman Izuku straightened up slightly at that, and huntresses on either side of him, Yang and Ruby straightened up with beaming smiles. It is your duty to uphold it. You have demonstrated the courage needed for such a task, and now it is our turn to provide you with the knowledge and the training to protect our world. With that, the woman faded away, giving an open view of the world beyond. Still dazed from his storm of thoughts, Izuku walked away from his sisters and up to the window, pressing a hand against the cold glass and looking out towards the world for a sense of peace, to take his mind off of things. Down below, he saw rows and rows of city streets, all in similar gray and beige color patterns. The midday sun painted the area in slightly cool shades, like a painter using the wrong palette. On this canvas, the people were nothing more than dots of different colors, specks like the flicks of a paintbrush. From so far away, unique faces and outfits, hundreds of lives and stories were all blended into one big picture, the whole of the city. Through the glass, he heard the faint sounds of honking and engines whirring mixed with thousands of conversations and doors opening and animals barking. All of this, and this is only such a small fraction. Their lives rest in the hands of the huntsman. In Izuku's hands, eventually. Hey, Yang's voice spoke up, causing Izuku to flinch and look up at his older sister, who smiled back down at him. Don't worry. We gotta look towards our new future at our new home in Beacon. Izuku smiled back, pushing all remaining questions and doubts to the back of his mind. She's right. The past is just that, the past. He needs to focus on surviving and passing school in Beacon if he has any chance of becoming a huntsman like he dreamed of being. The frantic sounds of footsteps behind Izuku caught his attention, making him and his two sisters turn towards the source. Sure enough, a lanky blonde boy taller than even Yang ran across the center of the ship, clutching his hands over his mouth while letting out a faint gagging sound. As he disappeared around the corner, Ruby approached her two siblings. I guess the sight isn't for everyone. To which Izuku giggled. Yeah, I guess so. I feel bad for him. I'll feel bad if he dares to get near me while he's puking. threatened Yang, but the upwards edge to her scowl showed how empty that threat was. Giggling with his siblings, Izuku's mind confirmed what he already knew. He'd rather be nowhere else than where he stood now. "Look at this place, 𝗵𝗲," exclaimed 𝗂𝗧𝗪, gesturing to the giant, medieval palace-styled school that towered before them. The numerous dark gray spires that littered the grassy plains and well-kept courtyards all centered around a giant clock tower that towered over all the land, its clock face seemingly glowing a dark green, like a watchful eye over the entire land. The many stone pathways weaved in and around the old yet modern architecture, like a giant maze with no walls. Students both old and new walked through the fields, flowing out of the dozens of airships like water into an empty river. The older students all flocked towards their dorms and reunited with old friends with cheerful hugs and loud laughter. Some older students stood with signs and smiles, ready to guide the new kids towards the opening ceremony and answer questions people may have. Stepping off her own ship, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 threw up her hands, her brown eyes wide with a dreamlike look. And a dream it was, still not believing where she stood even as she felt the solid concrete under her boots and breathed in the warm, spring-summer air, a far difference from the stagnant cold of the perpetual winter that 𝗂𝗧𝗪 was stuck in. A step behind her, 𝗵𝗲 warned, "Don't get too excited. It's just a few buildings. You should keep your mind focused on the initiation to come." "I know," 𝗂𝗧𝗪 spun around, dropping her hands back to her sides. "But I'm not worried about fighting some grim or being dropped off a cliff like you told me the alumni said the initiation to be. We can handle that, so there's no point in worrying about it." Putting her hands on her hips, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 continued, "I'm worried about the idea that we have to form teams. No one would tell us anything about how the teams form. And, besides Weiss, we don't know anyone here. But I didn't come to Beacon just to be on a team with only people I know. This is my chance to prove myself and get a fresh start. And that includes making friends and meeting new people." With a small smirk, 𝗵𝗲 complimented, "While I think the idea of making friends to be a pointless endeavor and childish, I have to admit that you have a point about making teams. What a strange big picture thought of you. I didn't think it was possible." "Hey," 𝗂𝗧𝗪 puffed her cheeks and stomped her foot, offended. "I can think of the big picture, thank you very much." Hooking his thumb on his belt, 𝗵𝗲 suggested, "It would be more efficient to split our focus. I'll scout our competition out while you intermingle with people. Aim for the stragglers, as they'll be the ones most eager to reveal vulnerabilities and open to trusting you." "Geez, can you not make it sound like everyone's our enemy? We're all future huntsmen and huntresses here, so we have to trust some people, right?" countered 𝗂𝗧𝗪, crossing her arms. Rather than reply, 𝗵𝗲 scowled and walked off, his lack of answer providing an answer enough to 𝗂𝗧𝗪. Watching the boy leave, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 huffed, "Some bodyguard. Can it kill him to lighten up sometimes?" Still, rather than waste time on that, she turned and decided to follow his advice. 𝗂𝗧𝗪 walked around the edge of campus until she reached the loading docks where the locals and the early arrivals of new students were debarking. Many had already moved away, talking in their crowds of friends from Signal, but a few remained, including a black-haired girl with a bow sitting almost impossibly on her head and a book in hand, and a green-haired boy scooting away from the scene of 𝗂𝗧𝗪's older sister Weiss chewing out a red-hooded girl. Of the two onlookers, the black-haired girl watched with disinterested curiosity, putting her book back into her bag when a vial of dust touched her foot, while the green-haired boy picked at his gloves so much that he practically pulled them off and slipped them into the pockets of his dark green jacket. Of all the figures, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 found herself lingering on the green-haired boy, feeling the same pull to him as the one that led her to Beacon in the first place. Was he what drew her here? He seemed to sense her the same way, for, as she stepped closer, he lifted his head and looked in her direction. The moment their eyes met, a vision surfaced in her mind. She was approaching the front gates of UA, ready to attend the assembly for the practical portion of the entrance exam. Nervous, she shifted her weight back and forth, eyeing her competitors as she passed. One boy caught her eye out of the crowd, like fate drew her towards him. He stood out for his plain-looking appearance amongst a sea of strangely shaped and colorful people. From the expression on his face, he looked equal parts excited and nervous, just like her. Without thinking, she walked over to him, ready to greet him. Upon seeing him trip on a raised part of the concrete, she rushed out and grazed her fingers along his shoulder, catching him with her quirk. He looked over at her, grateful for her act. From there, the vision began to blur and darken, fading into a fuzzy buzz. But, amongst all the white noise, his name remained in her mind. Izuku Midoriya. 𝗂𝗧𝗪 spoke, unaware she said his name out loud. Despite her quiet voice, he still heard her as if she shouted it across the courtyard. Leaving the other girls behind, he approached her, his steps slow and cautious, like he still didn't know whether she was a friend or an enemy. When he stepped within arm's reach, he reached out to graze her arm. "You're 𝗂𝗧𝗪 Uraraka, right?" This is probably a strange question, but have we met before?" Both teens blurted out that question at the same time, the very same thought passing through their minds. At their synergy, a wide smile crossed the two kids' lips and they burst out laughing. When their laughter died, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 tilted her head at the boy. I don't think we've met, unless you've been to Atlas before, but at the same time, I think we have. Laughing awkwardly, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 scratched the back of her head. I know that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. No. Izuku held up his hands. I actually get it. I've been going through the same thing. But maybe we should start with just an introduction. He held out a hand to her. I'm Izuku Midoriya Zyō Rose, and this he pulled out his greatsword to show it to her. Is Pharaoh intrigued? 𝗂𝗏𝗄 asked. Why do you introduce yourself with your weapon? Does it hold that much value to you? Realizing his slip-up, Izuku blushed. Oh, it's a habit that my sisters and I have. As he put his sword back, he elaborated. Weapons are a part of ourselves, right? Just like semblances, they reflect the user's personality. It only makes sense to make them known as much as we would share any other information about ourselves. It's actually one of the things I'm most excited to see about Beacon. Not just the weapons or the semblances, but how the huntsmen use the two in tandem and have it reflect in their fighting styles. That's what I find so cool, and it's what deviates the pros from the students. As the boy rambled on with sparkles in his eyes and his whole being vibrating with energy, 𝗂𝗏𝗄's smile softened. For some reason, listening to him filled her chest with a bittersweet warmth, like returning home, so she couldn't bring herself to cut his rambles short. Eventually, he quieted down, his face bright red when he realized how long his rambling went on for. Throwing up his hands, he sputtered, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go on for so long. Anyways, it's your turn. Perking up, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 held out her hand to him. I'm 𝗂𝗏𝗄 𝗧𝗏. I hope we can be good friends. At that, the boy's eyes lit up and he accepted her hand. An image flashed through her mind. One of a boy in a rabbit-styled mask and a powerful look in his eyes. Even though he looked young, his eyes spoke of wear and age. And his aura commanded respect by all those around him. His presence drew others towards him, forcing eyes his way and convincing others to follow him without saying a word. Something in 𝗂𝗏𝗄's body ripped her away from the other boy, like his flesh burned her down to her core, even though nothing physically happened between them. Even as 𝗂𝗏𝗄 panted for breath and she calmed down, the warmth of his hand touching hers still remained. Equally confused, Izuku looked between his hand and her. Based on his wide eyes and shallow breathing, she guessed he experienced something similar. Running a finger along his exposed hand, Izuku mumbled, what was that? Did it happen because we touched, or did it have to be skin on skin? Looking down at her own hand, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 wondered the same thing. On the flight to Beacon, she decided to take her gloves off in order to not activate the dust inside. And now, she's glad she did. For, as overwhelming as it was, that sensation couldn't feel more satisfying, like a key piece of puzzle she didn't even know she was working on. Locking eyes with Izuku, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 breathed out, what's going on? 𝗳𝗏𝗄 pursed his lips as he watched the wide crowds of new students flock towards the auditorium like sheep being guided without a shepherd. Many of the students laughed and joked with their friends, not worrying about what's to come. Some students showed off their weapons to other students, explaining them, while others flaunted their powers to whoever would give them attention. Scowling, Nito reached up for the necklace tucked under the collar of his black jacket. Seriously, the best of the best. They really are all the same. Lips pursed in a deep frown, he turned to leave, seeing nothing worth noting. But before he could take a single step, the world melted away, shifting and transforming into a small classroom on the second floor, with a wall of windows that peered out into the endless city beyond the school's campus. Opposite the windows, Monoma Nito threw open the only door to the classroom. Inside, sitting in the rows of desks, were students of all shapes and sizes, from figures short enough to be toddlers to a man so tall Monoma questioned how he could get into the school. All of them chatted with each other, carefree and worryless, as if they were still back in junior high instead of in the best hero school in the nation. Rolling his eyes, Monoma muttered, small-minded fools. Is this really the future of hero society? Ignoring the others, the boy weaved through the crowds of students and set his bag down on a desk towards the back. As Monoma sat down and started to unpack his stuff, a loud and cheerful voice spoke above him. Hey now, it's not nice to call your classmates that, especially when you haven't even met us yet. Annoyed, Monoma lifted his gaze up to an orange-haired girl with a strong expression and bright blue eyes. She wore a confident yet comforting smirk, like she saw everyone as her little siblings. Despite the clear power and confidence in her aura, she clearly meant to be no threat. At least, not to anyone in that room. Yet, throwing on a cocky tone, Monoma mocked, oh sorry, did I hurt your feelings? You know, people who are so fragile should go ahead and quit now, because they definitely wouldn't have the strength to keep up with the pros. Geez, the girl sighed, but she still smiled at him. You're definitely going to be an interesting one. Guess it'll be up to me to keep you in line. Smirking, Monoma leaned forward on his hands. Oh, you really think you can? I'd like to see you try. Mirroring his smirk, the girl leaned her hand on his desk. Don't underestimate me, kid. We'll see who's small-minded. Blinking back to reality, Nito reached up to feel his cheeks, discovering small trails of tears with no just origin for them. Quickly, he wiped away the tears and fled from the crowd, sprinting back towards the loading docks for the airships. Focus. Don't get distracted from your responsibilities. Do not forget the goal. Nothing else matters. Block out all other distractions. None of them matter, merely means to an end. Just find 𝗧𝗪𝗏. Does nothing else really matter? Then why do this? Then why do any of this? Meanwhile, 𝗧𝗪𝗏 blurted out, "What? The criminals recognized you." The two were walking through the wide-open courtyards, talking about their pasts and what visions they've seen. When Izuku mentioned his interactions with the masked man and mysterious woman, 𝗧𝗪𝗏 stopped in her tracks from shock. Izuku nodded. Yeah, he definitely sounded like he didn't expect to see me, but also said he wasn't surprised I was there, like he knew a lot about me despite the fact I've never seen him before or even know his name. I wonder if it has something to do with our visions. Does he have visions too, and has just seen me in them? Or is he a member of the group responsible for these strange visions in the first place? No, if he were, he wouldn't be surprised to see me, unless he believed the visions would keep me from becoming a huntsman. Or he's part of the group that blocked our memories of our past life, and these visions are fragments that didn't get blocked, like water slipping through the cracks. 𝗧𝗪𝗏 chimed in, helpfully. Surprised, Izuku visibly jumped several feet in the air, not expecting the interjection. Giggling at the boy's reaction, 𝗧𝗪𝗏 apologized. Sorry, I just couldn't help but chime in. I've actually been thinking about something similar, though I didn't go in depth as you do. It's kind of cool how much you think about it. At that, Izuku's cheeks flushed again, not actually expecting someone to listen to his rambling. Most of the time, only Ruby and Uncle Kuro actually tried to make sense of his rambles, so for a complete stranger to understand him threw him for a loop. Shaking off his shock, Izuku questioned, "Do you really believe that past life theory that you mentioned earlier? The world in those visions seemed pretty different compared to Remnant, not even mentioning the people. Plus, if it were a past life, then how would that explain that criminal recognizing me? But what else could it be?" countered 𝗧𝗪𝗏. Curious, sure, that world looked totally weird, but it also had a lot of similarities, didn't it? I mean, they didn't have auras, but they had semblances, or something like it. And it seemed like they have professional heroes, which are sort of like huntsmen. So maybe it was the world millennia ago, back before the Great War. Or she perked up, suddenly excited by the idea forming in her mind. What if it's the future? What if we're secretly time travelers from a totally awesome future, where there are more than 4 kingdoms, and we had to go back in time to stop something, but lost our memories along the way. And maybe that criminal is another time traveler from the group of people that we're supposed to stop. Izuku's eyes sparkled, hearing this girl be invested as he was in the whole situation. Considering her suggestions, Izuku countered, it could be time travel, but that doesn't explain the lack of aura and dust, nor the fact the technology is more primitive than it is now. You'd think it'd be the other way around. Maybe it could be a dream world of some sort. We do often forget our dreams. But then, why do only we appear in that dream world, and not any of our friends or family? In my case, it could be a bloodline thing, because I don't actually know my birth family. But aren't you genetically part of the 𝗔𝗍 family? And yet your siblings don't get the same visions, Izuku. 𝗧𝗪𝗏 cut in, stopping the boy before his mumbles could turn incoherent. You're really getting into this, huh? Though, 𝗧𝗪𝗏's eyes clouded over as a possibility formed in her mind. You might be onto something. After all, I'm really only half related to the rest of my family. I'm actually born out of wedlock, and my mom died when I was little, so I never knew anything about her. It's possible she might have known something. Sighing, Izuku concluded, slumping over. So, in conclusion, we have nothing to go off of, no definite evidence of anything, and no way to find out more. And here I thought everything would start to make sense. Hey, come on, 𝗧𝗪𝗏 patted the boy on the back. We've already come up with a bunch of stuff and new information just by meeting each other, so I'm sure we'll find answers eventually. We've just got to keep our heads high. Hearing her enthusiasm, Izuku felt the weight on his shoulders lift and a small smile across his lips. Part of him could tell she was equally troubled by their situation, by the strain to her smile and the dark edge to her eyes, but that only served as more reason for Izuku to think positively like her. Still, Izuku turned his gaze towards the rest of campus, where the crowds of students were diluting back into the buildings and out of sight. I wish there were more people who were like us that we could bounce information off of. If we got this much information from just the two of us, a new person could open up a world of new doors and even some answers. Mulling her thoughts over with a faint hum, 𝗧𝗪𝗏 pressed a finger to her chin, likely thinking about possible people. After a moment's thought, she snapped her fingers. Oh, I think I know someone who might be in the same situation as us. Before she could say any further, however, a brown and black portal opened above them, allowing a figure to fly through and land on top of Izuku, sending both teens to the ground. Watching the whole thing, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 bit back a laugh before rushing over to make sure they were all right. Pushing the figure off of himself, Izuku looked over to realize the figure was another brunette girl, a faunus with wolf ears, pale brown eyes like melted chocolate, and an outfit that reminded Izuku of the uniforms that he's seen police wear. Moaning, the girl clutched her head and looked around, clearly dazed from the fall. When her eyes locked with Izuku's, she registered what happened and leapt to her feet. "Oh, my brothers, I am so sorry. I totally didn't mean to fall on you. My aim with my portals is awful in new areas, and everything around here looks the same and just, are you hurt?" She held out her hand to Izuku, who took it, still slightly overwhelmed by the girl's sudden entrance. With the girl's help, Izuku hopped to his feet. Oh, I'm okay. But was that a portal? That must be a totally awesome semblance. Is it coordinate-based, or do you have to have some sort of reference? Is there a limit to the distance you can travel? How about time between portals? Can you summon more than once? What about if someone or something is in the portals when you close them? Can you close them with the girl's giggling cut him off? She rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, her voice sweet and amused. You're quite energetic, aren't you? Though it might be wiser to save some of that energy for the battlefield, rather than running your mouth, would it not? For some reason, hearing the girl's giggles rubbed 𝗂𝗏𝗄 the wrong way, forcing her to step in with a friendly wave. "Hi there. It's nice to meet you. I'm 𝗂𝗏𝗄𝗄𝗏, growled the girl, her bright eyes clouding over like a dust storm the moment she looked at 𝗂𝗏𝗄. "I know plenty about who you are. I want nothing to do with the likes of your family." Before 𝗂𝗏𝗄 could defend herself, Izuku stepped in on her behalf, physically stepping between the two girls. "Hey, that's not fair. Wouldn't judging 𝗂𝗏𝗄 just based on her family be the same as people judging you just because you're a faunus?" Crossing her arms, the girl now directed her glare down at Izuku. "Are you seriously equating generations' worth of racism to disliking a member of one of the main families that perpetuate that racism?" Izuku opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out, knowing this girl had a point. Sheepishly, he glanced down at the pavement, his bravery wavering from that point. No, of course not, B. But still, stepping in, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 rested a hand on Izuku's shoulder, but her gaze focused on the other brunette. "You're right. What my family did is terrible. I won't try to pretend that it wasn't. And I'm ashamed at how I stood by and let it happen, benefited from it, even." She pushed herself past Izuku and held out a hand to the girl. "But that's in the past. I came to Beacon because I want to be known as me, not my family. I wanted to start over, so why don't we do that? Why don't we start over?" I'm 𝗂𝗏𝗄𝗏. Before 𝗂𝗏𝗄 could finish, the girl brushed past her, nudging the shorter girl so hard with her shoulder that 𝗂𝗏𝗄 nearly fell over. Helplessly, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 only watched as the faunus walked off with a huff, not even sparing 𝗂𝗏𝗄 another glance. With a guiltily darkness in her eyes, 𝗂𝗏𝗄's gaze sank to the ground and her hand dropped back to her side. Looking between the two girls, Izuku muttered, I'm going to go after her. I'm sure there's a way for you two to be friends." He didn't want to have to choose. With none of his friends from Signal, all he had were his sisters. Now he has the chance to make plenty of new friends, only to already have to choose between them. Why? No, if he was to one day accomplish major deeds, save hundreds of lives, and take down 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝗏 like he's always read about, like he's always aspired to do, then he can handle something as small as getting two new possible friends to get along. Right? Watching Izuku take off after the faunus wolf girl, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 couldn't bring herself to be upset at him, knowing she'd be the same way if she wasn't the person the faunus was mad at. So, instead, she just scratched the back of her head. "Not a great start to my first day at Beacon, huh? If by not great, you mean a total train wreck, then absolutely." A voice spoke up from behind 𝗂𝗏𝗄, making her spin around to see none other than Nito approaching her, his hands shoved into his pockets and his typical smirk on his lips. If 𝗂𝗏𝗄 noticed how his jacket was slipping off of his shoulders, his belt was tilted, or that his hair looked like he emerged from a tornado, she commented on none of it. Instead, she blurted out, "Where did you come from? How did I not hear you approaching me?" Defeated, her shoulders slumped, mumbling the next part under her breath. "I'm normally much better at that." "It's because you're doing exactly what I warned you not to do," scolded Nito, flicking 𝗂𝗏𝗄 in the forehead once he was within arm's reach. "If I had been an enemy, then you'd already be dead. Don't become careless just because you're on school campus. You're just as much a target here as you are anywhere else in Remnant." Cheeks flushed, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 swatted his hand away. "I know that. And an enemy wouldn't get the drop on me that easily. Don't underestimate me, either." Rather than reply, Nito's gaze drifted towards where Izuku and the wolf girl ran off. "Anyways, I see that friend-making is going just as well as I expected." Guilt re-emerging, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 crossed her arms over her chest, tucking it close to her body. Even though she remained silent, Nito gasped, "Don't beat yourself up about those pointless idiots. Their short-sighted stubbornness means they won't just let go of the past so easily, especially a past." messy as yours. And she has every right to, 𝐒𝐴𝐿 countered, her voice stern yet distant. I want to let go of my family name. I'm not naive enough to believe that it'll happen with a snap of the fingers. But that's the whole point of this. I just gotta keep working really hard so that one day soon, people will hear 𝗂𝗏𝗃 and focus on the 𝗂𝗏 part rather than the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 part. While Nito rolled his eyes, his smirk softened into a comforting smile as he pointed out, all right, 𝗂𝗏, but if you want to do that, your first step is probably trying not to miss the opening ceremony. Instantly, all the color drained from 𝗂𝗏's face until she was whiter than the clouds over their heads or the snow of Alta. Her smile dropped as nothing but helpless, pained sputters poured from her lips. Like a child caught breaking a vase on the coffee table, 𝗂𝗏 peered up at her bodyguard with pitiful eyes, desperate for his help but too prideful to ask for it out loud. Chuckling at the girl's childish nature, Nito flicked the girl's forehead again and held out his hand to summon a portal similar to the faunus girl's. Only this time the edge of the portal glowed a silvery golden shade, rather than the dark brown of the original. Calmly, Nito explained, I copied the girl's semblance as I walked by her earlier. Took me some trial and error, but I figured out it was image-based. Luckily, Beacon Auditorium's one of the few rooms all over the internet, so picturing it isn't hard. We should be able to make it in time this way. With that, he stepped through the portal. Silently, 𝗂𝗏 spared one final glance towards where the other two disappeared before turning her attention back towards the portal and stepping in after him. Wait, please, Izuku called out after the wolf faunus. Eventually, Izuku decided to tap into the slightest percent of his semblance, allowing him to close the distance between them. Unfortunately, he misjudged his speed, resulting in him barreling straight into the girl, sending them both to the ground. While the fall scraped up his hands and arms, Izuku ignored the pain to focus on the girl, apologizing, sorry, I didn't mean to run into you. Moaning, the girl rubbed her behind and pushed herself onto her feet. It's all right. I guess it makes up for me knocking you over earlier. Dusting herself off, she turned to leave, but Izuku grabbed her wrist to stop her. Hang on, please. I know we didn't have the best start, but I didn't mean to be rude to you. I really do want to be friends. The girl ripped her wrist free and spun around to face Izuku. Look, we don't all have to get along here, all right? You're clearly close with that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 girl, and whoop to do for you. But I don't let that slide that easily. I know. Izuku dropped his hand back to his side, his eyes softening with understanding. And I'm not asking you to. But why does that have to impede us being friends? I mean, it can't be worse than being alone. Who's to say I'm alone? Growled Daniela, furious and cold. Her ears sharpened and her fists clenched at her sides. Her dark eyes crackled with rage, like a fire ready to roast Izuku from the inside out. The fire pierced into Izuku's soul, burning up any and all objections Izuku prepared in his mind. For some reason, the girl's tone of voice struck Izuku's core, shutting him down and leaving him dumbstruck, unable to process or protest until after the girl scoffed and walked into the auditorium, leaving Izuku standing alone like a fool. Why? That fire in her eyes. Why did it strike Izuku so off guard? Young's had a similar fire, and yet she never shut him down like that. Visions of a blonde boy with explosive hands and a booming voice flashed through his mind. The same fire burned in the boy's crystal red eyes, glaring at Izuku with a similar hatred as the girl, an unwavering inferno that concealed far more behind that wall of flames. Something about the fire drew Izuku in, wanting to call out to the blonde boy to understand why the flames burned so ferociously, so bright yet forever out of Izuku's reach. A name formed on Izuku's tongue. Izuku, what are you doing standing out here? A familiar voice spoke up, snapping the green-haired boy out of his thoughts. He spun on his heel, all thoughts of those visions fading from his mind, and saw Ruby approaching him. Noticeably, she was accompanied by a tall and scrawny blonde boy in white armor with a simple sword sheath on his hip. The boy's sapphire eyes sparkled with a mixed sense of hesitancy and curiosity, like how Izuku felt when he saw a professional huntsman in action, like he couldn't believe he stood where he was. Looking between them, Izuku gestured to the blonde boy. Ruby, who's this? Did you already make a friend? To his surprise, Ruby's smile contorted into an angry scowl as she stomped up to Izuku and poked him repeatedly in the chest, making the boy's smile turn shameful. Yeah, he helped me out after you abandoned me. I can't believe you. We were supposed to be in this together. How could you just leave me alone? Ruby. The blonde stepped forward, raising a finger to chime in. Stay out of this, John. Ruby immediately shot him down, holding up a hand to hold him back without removing her gaze from her brother. Sheepishly, the boy, John, did so, instead giving the girl a shy wave before sneaking past the siblings and into the auditorium, leaving the poor green-haired boy victim to yet another girl's rage. This one much more energized and frantic, like a supercharged atom compared to the earlier girl's inferno. Guiltily, Izuku apologized. I'm sorry, Ruby, but I saw. He cut himself off, realizing that he was about to admit to knowing 𝗂𝗏, but He didn't. At least, not before today. Or, at least, not that he knew of. But if 𝗂𝗧𝗪𝐿's theory about the visions being of a past life are true. No, 𝐒𝐴ZKU shook his head, cutting off his ramble before it could begin. Now wasn't the time for that. Not with everything going on and his sister's already clear anxiety and rage from him abandoning her earlier. He didn't need to add more wind to her storm of thoughts. In an attempt to change the subject, 𝗧𝗂 asked, "So, how did your talk with that white-haired girl go?" "Oh, you mean the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Ruby quoted the title with a sour, mocking tone, as if the words poised her tongue just by speaking them. Internally, 𝗧𝗂 winced. So that white-haired girl was related to 𝗂𝗧𝗪. And, by the sounds of it, she didn't sound very popular. That might explain why the wolf girl sounded so disgusted by the family. But 𝗂𝗧𝗪 was so nice. Throwing down her arms with a tired, defeated sigh, Ruby muttered, "Talk about a horrible first day. Let's just go find Yang." Silently, 𝗧𝗂 nodded and the two stepped into the auditorium. Looking around, 𝗧𝗂 felt his breath leave his lungs at the sight awaiting them. Dozens of people all crowded into the seemingly endless stretches of the auditorium, packed so tightly like a kid trying to fit all of his stuffed animals in a tiny bin, yet still spacious enough to allow people to move around and not trigger anyone's claustrophobia. People of all shapes and sizes and faunas of all animal species all gathered together, now in one space for 𝗧𝗂 to properly take them in. In this small space, the crowds felt less like paint splotches on a canvas and more like a colorful, overflowing dam waiting for its gates to open. A few figures stood out amongst the sea of colors. 𝗂𝗧𝗪 and a platinum blonde boy stood near one of the other exits, with the brunette practically bouncing in place with excitement while the boy tried to calm her down. Nearby, a similarly energetic girl with a silver hammer on her back and a pink and white outfit rambled away for impossible lengths without breaths into a green-clothed, Australian boy who listened to all of it in silent rapture. In the other direction, an amber-armored red-headed girl scanned the crowd with interest, her gaze lingering on John, who eyed the rest of the crowd with a far more anxious, shy glimmer. Towards the other side of the auditorium, the wolf faunus girl studied the crowd around her with her arms crossed and a neutral expression, though her eyes remained as sharp as they were when they were pointed at 𝗧𝗂. Towards the front, Yang, now without her signal friends, shot to her feet and waved to her siblings. "Ruby, 𝗧𝗂, over here. I saved you guys a spot." Sheepishly, the two weaved through the thick crowds until they reached their blonde older sister. Once reunited, Yang put her hands on her hips and leaned towards her siblings. "So, how's your first day?" Instantly, Ruby snapped. "Oh, you mean when you and 𝗧𝗂 both abandoned me and I literally exploded." "Yikes, meltdown already," Yang teased, nudging her sister. But the redhead swatted her away. "No, I mean I literally exploded. There was a lot of fire and smoke and this crabby girl wouldn't stop yelling at me after I tripped over her luggage. I felt really, really bad but she just wouldn't stop yelling." Confused, Yang leaned around her sister and looked at 𝗧𝗂 for confirmation, who shrugged helplessly, earning an annoyed glare from the blonde. Focusing back on the youngest of the three siblings, Yang echoed part of her sister's rambles that stood out. "Crabby girl." "What crabby girl?" Almost on cue, a new voice spoke up behind the trio, her tone snappy and sharp. "There you are." Terrified, Ruby leapt 10 feet in the air and into 𝗧𝗂's arms, who had to activate his semblance just to keep from falling over, clinging to her brother like a life raft. Ruby whined, "Oh brothers, it's happening again." Confused, 𝗧𝗂 looked over at a white-haired girl in an all-white dress and blue-gray eyes, who he guessed must have been the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 that Ruby called her earlier. While he remembered her snappy tone from what little he saw between her and Ruby, she somehow carried the same snarky rage and egotistical composure that he saw her carry before. Stomping down her foot, the white-haired girl glared at Ruby. "You're lucky we weren't blown off the side of a cliff." Surprised, Yang turned to her sister, remarking, "Oh my brothers, you really exploded." "It was an accident," insisted Ruby, hopping out of 𝗧𝗂's arms to face the girl head-on. "It was an accident." But the girl cut her off, shoving a pamphlet called Dust for Dummies in her face and going on a long ramble that could rival 𝗧𝗂's muttering moment. Although hers sounded more sped up and rehearsed, like a script she was rushing to get through as fast as possible. At the end, she shoved the pamphlet into Ruby's hands. "If you really want to start making things up to me, then read this and never talk to me again." The white-haired girl huffed and started to walk off, but 𝗧𝗂, unable to hold in his curiosity any longer, blurted out, "Wait, are you related to 𝗂𝗧𝗪, by chance?" That caught the girl's attention, causing her to turn on a heel and face 𝗧𝗂. Her expression clear as glass, one of disgust and shock. Marching over to 𝗧𝗂, she poked a finger in his chest, demanding, "How do you know 𝗂𝗧𝗪? Did someone tell you?" Flushed, 𝗧𝗂 held up his hands innocently. "I met her on my way here. We started talking and she seemed interested in making new friends." He pointedly left out what they spent most of their time actually talking about, not knowing whether 𝗂𝗧𝗪 told her or not. Although, he tilted his head, a realization hitting him, she didn't mention that her sister was here. Once again, the white-haired girl flinched, and an unreadable expression crossed her face, like a million emotions were crossing her mind all at once, none more dominant than the others. In a split second, she blinked those emotions away and turned away in a huff. 𝐻𝗵𝗲. I suppose that makes sense. There's a reason she's the least well-known 𝗔𝗨 amongst us. Under her breath, she added, so quiet that Izuku guessed she didn't even mean to say it out loud. I didn't realize I'd be included in the people she'd cut out. Is that why? She cut herself off, diving too deep into her thoughts. Seeing the clouded look in the white-haired girl's eyes, Ruby began, why? What? A faint pink tint dusted the girl's cheeks as she cleared her throat and regained her icy composure. Crossing her arms, she scoffed, it's none of your business. I've already wasted enough time with you buffoons. She started to stomp off, but, a few feet away, she turned back and locked eyes with Izuku. And my name is Weiss 𝗧𝗍, for your information. And don't make the mistake of thinking we can be friends just because 𝗂𝗧𝗪 was nice to you. She acts nice to everyone, but she'll toss you aside once she realizes what a pain you. She looked over at the other two girls. All of you are. After all, she still has to maintain the 𝗧𝗍 family's reputation. Once again, she tagged on quietly, no matter how much she denies it. Confused, Izuku opened his mouth to ask her about it, but was cut off by all the lights in the auditorium flickering off at once. Noticeably, only a single spotlight on stage stayed on, commanding all the students to look in its direction. From the shadows, Professor 𝗂𝗏 emerged with the same suit and mug that he had when Izuku first met him, and Glinda stepped out behind him, remaining partially in the shadows. Quietly, he approached the microphone in the center of the spotlight and cleared his throat in it, quieting down any remains of conversations left. In a soft-spoken yet powerful tone, he spoke, the microphone carrying his words throughout the room like fog in the air. I'll keep this brief. You have traveled here today in search of knowledge, to hone your craft and acquire new skills, and when you have finished, you plan to dedicate your life to the protection of the people. But I look amongst you, and all I see is wasted energy in need of purpose, direction. You assume knowledge will free you of this, but your time at this school will prove that knowledge can only carry you so far. It is up to you to take the first step. With that heavy, ominous but no less truthful declaration, 𝗂𝗏 stepped back into the shadows to allow Glinda to take the mic and announce, you will gather in the ballroom tonight. Tomorrow, your initiation begins. Be ready. You are dismissed. As soon as that last word left her mouth, all of the lights flicked back on, allowing a sea of murmurs to rise into the air from the eerie speech. Putting her hands on her hips, Young commented, well, that seemed kind of off. What was up with that speech? Equally lost, Ruby shrugged. It felt like he wasn't even talking to us, didn't it? Like he had a different audience in mind. Pursing his lips, Izuku muttered, was it really meant to be an inspirational speech? It felt almost like a warning. I wonder what's going through his mind right now. Silently, he looked back up at where 𝗂𝗏 was walking towards backstage, his eyes focusing on the man's glossy gaze. Even from a distance, Izuku saw the age in the man's eyes, along with something unrecognizable, unfamiliar that wasn't there when he first met the headmaster. For some reason, this whole situation made Izuku's hair stand on end and goosebumps crawl up his spine. But it also piqued his curiosity all the same. That night, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 changed into her pajamas, a simple pale pink t-shirt and white sweatpants with the 𝗧𝗍 snowflakes on her shoulders and her own symbol, a trail of meteor rocks tailing a small planet, all contained in a light pink circle on the pockets of her pants. Yawning, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 stretched her arms over her head and turned to the person next to her. Man, what a day, huh? Talk about an eventful start to our new lives as Beacon students, huh? And she cut herself off when she turned, expecting to see her bodyguard, only to see Weiss standing there in his place. Taken aback, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 dropped her arms back down and stepped back. Weiss, what are you doing here? I thought I ran into that annoying green boy earlier, Weiss informed, her tone suspiciously distant and monotone, the plain-looking one. She pointedly didn't look at 𝗂𝗧𝗪, instead focusing her gaze on the ground between them while keeping her arms crossed firmly over her chest. Instantly, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 concluded that only one person matched that description, Izuku Midoriya Zio Rose, her fellow vision sharer. But why would she bring it up? Unless, did he tell her about the visions? Nervously, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 giggled, innocently twirling her hair like a schoolgirl. Oh, did you know? What did he say? He said, Weiss began, dropping her hands to her sides, that you didn't even mention me when you two first met. Relieved, 𝗂𝗧𝗪 bit back the urge to sigh, instead tilting her head to ask, and what's wrong with that? There's more to my life than just being related to the heiress of the 𝗧𝗍 company. Under her breath, she added, despite what some might think. Her mind flashed back to the girl from earlier, judging and dismissing her because of her family name, before they could even get to know each other. The whole interaction left a bitter taste in her mouth, like she drank a bottle of vinegar through no fault of the wolf faunus. As if reading the brunette's mind, Weiss' eyes widened, finally looking up at 𝐒𝐿𝐵. "You're seriously going through with your word, aren't you?" Firmly, 𝐒𝐿𝐵 straightened up and declared, her fists clenched at her sides. "Yes, I want to prove my strength to stand on my own 2 feet. And I can't do that by clinging to the family name. Especially considering that name really isn't as great as you think it is, Weiss. It's fine if you want to do that, you're the heiress, after all, but I want to be more than a 𝗧𝗍." Releasing her grip with a sigh, 𝐒𝐿𝐵 smiled softly, but her eyes still burned with the same fire. "I'm sorry for not mentioning you to Izuku, really. And it's not like I want to fight you, Weiss. After all, you're more to me than just a 𝗧𝗍 heiress. But please, respect my decision." Weiss pursed her lips, considering whether or not to retort, but instead just flipped her ponytail back over her shoulder and brushed past 𝐒𝐿𝐵. "Fine. It's not like I can stop you, anyways." She started to walk away towards the main area of the ballroom, but stopped to add, keeping her back to 𝐒𝐿𝐵. "And, by the way, if you want to prove your strength, running and hiding from the family name is how you do it. And you're deceiving yourself if you think otherwise." Even though she only stood a short distance from 𝐒𝐿𝐵, her voice and words made it sound like there stood miles between the 2 sisters. Silently, 𝐒𝐿𝐵's smile shifted into a frown as she watched her sister walk away, not tearing her gaze away from the heiress even as she disappeared amongst the crowds of students. A voice nearby spoke up, "TCH, which of you is really deceiving themselves?" Unfazed by the sudden voice, 𝐒𝐿𝐵 lifted her gaze and turned around to see Nito standing on the frame of an open ballroom window, his eyes latched on Weiss's figure and a small, glowing purple pistol in his right hand. 𝐒𝐿𝐵 questioned, a visible bead of sweat forming from her sheer confusion. "Why are you up there? And why do you have your weapon ready?" Annoyingly, rather than answer the girl's question, Nito jumped down beside her, his pistol dissolving into purple smoke until only a gold and silver pocket watch remained. "Talk about a sight to return to. Daddy's girl upset that you're not clinging to the silver spoon as tightly as she is." 𝐒𝐿𝐵 spared one final glance at Weiss, now far across the room. "I think she's still doubtful about whether I'll see my decision through to the end. But it's okay." She turned and smiled brightly at Nito. "That's all the more motivation to prove her wrong, right?" An unreadable expression crossed over the blonde's face before it shifted into an amused smirk and a slow shake of his head. "You're so cliché sometimes. I think it's high time you lay off the fairy tales for a while and get used to reality." "Hey," 𝐒𝐿𝐵 puffed her cheeks, offended. Like a flip of a switch, she realized, frantically reaching for her bag. "Oh yeah, that's right." She pulled out a small notebook and a fancy pen with her symbol on its cap. "I almost forgot." With a new burst of energy, she flipped through the book to the first empty page and started writing. Curious, Nito crossed his arms. "Talk about a mood change. What kind of trouble are you scheming now?" "I promised to send Whitley letters about my time at Beacon," informed 𝐒𝐿𝐵, before she pumped her empty hand in the air and swore, "I will convince him that the huntsman lifestyle is not a waste of time." Or, dropping her hand back down, she shrugged, "At least convince him to unlock his aura and start learning how to use glyphs like Weiss and Winter." Intrigued, Nito sat down beside 𝐒𝐿𝐵 and peered over her shoulder. "What would be the point of that? I've met your brother. Seems like a waste of breath to me." Puffing her cheeks, 𝐒𝐿𝐵 muttered, "HMPH. I'm not surprised. You two seem more related than him and I," but her expression relaxed back into a bittersweet smile as she reflected on her last moments with her youngest brother before leaving for Beacon. "Oh, you cannot be serious," a 15-year-old boy remarked, throwing open the door of 𝐒𝐿�B's room and walking in without wasting a beat. The boy's silvery white hair, normally perfectly kept, had several strands out of place, likely signs of him tugging at it, and his light blue and white suit now bore several wrinkles and even a stain, a sight that the boy would normally declare completely unbecoming on any other day. Except now he seemed much more focused on the sight of his half-sister packing her things than on his own appearance. Not looking up, 𝐒𝐿𝐵 scolded, though her smile and light tone betrayed her words. "Whitley, how rude. You know better than to come marching into a girl's room." "What if I was changing, huh?" But Whitley wasn't in the mood, jabbing a finger at the brunette. "Don't joke around, 𝐒𝐿𝐵. What's this I hear about you leaving for Beacon? Weiss going there is bad enough, but now you want to chase after her? I thought you were wiser than that." "I'm not chasing after Weiss. I'm going there for my own reasons not related to her," 𝐒𝐿𝐵 corrected, reaching for her case of her spare daggers and slipping them into her suitcase. As she grabbed her backup gloves, she added, "I didn't even know she wanted to go to Beacon until a little while ago, but that gave me the push to actually speak up about wanting to go there myself." Scoffing, Whitley threw out his hands to either side. "Oh, so you just happened to want to go to school halfway across Remnant. Why, is Atlas suddenly not up to your arbitrary standards?" Hands stalling, 𝐒𝐿𝐵's smile turned into a knowing smirk as she concluded, "Whitley, this isn't just about me going to Beacon, is it?" A sharp intake of breath gave 𝗂𝗂𝐴 all the answers she needed, even without any words leaving Whitley's lips. His arms fell back to his sides, and he crossed them over his chest, as much defensively as it was out of annoyance. Turning to her brother, 𝗂𝗂𝐴 walked over to Whitley, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You know I can't stay in this house forever, little brother. I had to go stand on my own eventually, had to leave Atlas eventually. It's just happening a little sooner than expected." Scowling, Whitley slapped the hand away and stepped back. "I'm well aware of that. You've made that fact abundantly clear. I simply cannot comprehend why you chose to become a huntress, of all things. Just what exactly can a single huntress or huntsman do that an army cannot? It's nothing but a waste of time." While most would latch onto the boy's sharp words and deep frown, 𝗂𝗂𝐴 instead noted the boy's clouded over gaze and faraway look. Smiling knowingly, 𝗂𝗂𝐴 promised, "I know it'll be hard to be in this house alone, and it pains me more than anything to leave you alone, but don't worry, I'll come back for you. I promise. Plus," she winked, "I'll make sure to keep you constantly updated on all the exciting and fun adventures we go on. I bet they'll convince you to change your mind." Rolling his eyes, Whitley countered, "I highly doubt that." Back in the present, 𝗂𝗂𝐴 kept her nostalgic smile as she wrote about her first day and the people she met. Beside her, Nito asked, "Why are you insistent on Whitley unlocking his semblance? It makes no difference if he wants to go into business, so it wouldn't do him much good." "I'm worried about him being too dependent on the guards and soldiers," 𝗂𝗂𝐴 confessed, lowering her voice. "He's always so dependent on others, so overconfident that he's safe and secure. I can't imagine if he'll be able to handle facing an enemy without others to protect him. And, considering our family's reputation, there's a lot of enemies out there." Her frown deepened, her conversation with the girl once again flashing in her mind. Before Nito could reply, a third, shy voice spoke up, catching the duo's attention. Can I join you guys?" The two looked up to see Izuku standing nearby, clutching his pillow in his hands and a backpack slung on his shoulder. "I don't really want to be with my sisters right now." 𝗂𝗂𝐴 opened her mouth to ask, but two familiar voices rang out throughout the ballroom. "Oh, not you again." 𝗂𝗂𝐴 lifted her gaze to see Ruby and Yang glaring at Weiss, who returned their glare in full. Awkwardly, 𝗂𝗂𝐴 smiled in understanding. "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." Thankful, Izuku sat down against the wall nearby and pulled out a book. Curious, Nito gestured to the book. "Didn't expect someone as talkative as you to be the bookish type." "Let me guess, a cheesy superhero story." Embarrassed by the question, Izuku corrected, kind of. It's about a boy with a broken aura trying to break free of his chains. It's actually really interesting because there's these two other characters who he keeps trying to push away. But that just makes them all the more determined to save him." "Oh." 𝗂𝗂𝐴 closed her notebook and scooted over to him. "I've actually read that book. It's really good. You have good tastes. I'm a big superhero fan myself." Rolling his eyes, Nito concluded, "No wonder you two are friends. You both have garbage tastes." Sticking out her tongue at her bodyguard, 𝗂𝗂𝐴 huffed, "You just haven't found the right book yet. I'll get you to see our side one day." With that, the three continued to talk about small things until the candle lights overhead flickered out, forcing them to finally go to sleep. "You don't remember anything?" asked a 5-year-old Yang, peering up at the smaller, green-haired boy. Said boy sat in the blonde's bed, per her insistence, shifting back and forth in his seat. He sheepishly nodded at Yang. Just my name." And he revealed a small bracelet with several charms on it, the most apparent being a forest green key the same color as the bracelet's chain. "That my mom gave this to me." Curious, the girl's eyes sparkled even brighter as she leaned in to get a better look at the chain. "Whoa, that's so cool. What do all those symbols mean?" Shrugging cluelessly, the boy cupped his wrist with the bracelet in his other hand, rubbing a finger over each charm to look at them better. While some symbols had too many scratches and damages to make them out and others made no sense, he made out a few to be an explosion, burning ice, a star, a frog, and a lightning bolt, amongst the many others. Even though he didn't know why he had any of these charms, tears pricked the corners of his eyes from looking at them, like just the sight of them reopened old wounds in his chest that he didn't even realize were there. "Since it's your first birthday with us, we thought we'd each get you a charm that reminded you of us." Indeed, a constant reminder of our close connections as a class is likely to give you strength, even in the hard times. "Dude, do you ever calm down? Come on, you don't gotta logic out everything." Anyways, we each drew up our designs for the charms, and then I used to make them. The idea was totally manly. How could any of us say no? Our class reps totally struck out again. Totally. I'm really proud of my design. It was hard to come up with something, but I'm glad with how it turned out. Boy dumbasses, why don't you see if actually likes it before you start celebrating? Hey, are you okay? Yang shot up, seeing the thick trails of tears rolling down the boy's cheeks. His expression seemed entirely contradictory, with tears rolling down from his glossed-over eyes, but a wide smile on his lips. Reaching up, Izuku's eyes widened when he felt the cold tears touch his fingers, not realizing they were there. Quickly wiping his tears away, he admitted, I don't know. It feels like I just lost something really important to me, but I don't know what. Looking down, Young's surprise shifted into a deep frown as she confessed softly, I lost something too. That's why I was out in the woods when we found you. Lifting her head, she held out a hand to him. Let's promise to find what each other lost together. I'm sure with both of us looking we can both get back what we lost. And if we can get Ruby involved one day, it'd be even better. Dropping his hands from his face, the boy's smile widened until it barely fit on his face, and his green eyes sparkled like mini galaxies. Overjoyed, he took the hand and gave it a sharp shake. Yeah, it's a promise. As the licks of dawn broke out over Beacon, illuminating the ballroom in a variety of red, yellow, and orange hues, like a campfire the size of the school. Watching the lights grow on the walls, Izuku fiddled with his charm bracelet, now with hints of rust and dulled paint on several charms, but otherwise in top condition. Something about fiddling with the bracelet calms his nerves and steadies his mind, even if he doesn't know why. Looking down at the bracelet, his hand stalled on the explosion charm. Whoever you are, please give me the strength to beat this initiation today. If you're asking a charm bracelet to help you pass your test, you're already doomed. A voice spoke up from above Izuku, making him flinch and let go of the charm. Alarmed, the boy spun around to see Nito standing on the windowsill behind him, already changed into his all-black outfit and changing his glowing purple pistol back into a pocket watch, which he hooked back on his belt amongst all the others already hooked there. Smirking, Nito leapt down next to Izuku and mocked, I mean, seriously, are you desperate of being outshone that you need a piece of metal to give you strength? Or are you just childish? I know it's just a charm bracelet, defended Izuku, gripping said bracelet with his opposite hand. I was asking for strength from the people who gave me this bracelet. Crossing his arms, Nito raised his brow, and who might that be? Izuku frowned, his eyes glossing over with guilt from his lack of memories. I don't know. I don't remember. Skeptical, the blonde paused, as if considering something, before his contemplative frown broke into a smirk and laughter slipped past his lips. So you're seriously asking for strength from someone you don't even remember. You're aware how ridiculous that sounds, right? Embarrassed, Izuku's cheeks burned so bright he wouldn't be surprised if they caught fire. Desperately, he sputtered, hey, but Naito, his voice returning to normal, assured the boy, as strange as it sounds, I believe you. After all, in such an illogical and unusual world such as Remnant, a situation like yours is far from unbelievable. However, he walked past Izuku, making a point to nudge the boy's shoulder as he warned, if I were you, I would keep the origin of that bracelet to yourself, especially if it is truly as valuable to you as you make it sound. Precious items that don't get properly protected get chewed up and spit back out in this world. Izuku opened his mouth to reply, but Ochako popped her head into the ballroom and called out, Nito, did you finish your morning patrol? Come on, we've got to beat the rush if we want to eat breakfast. Yeah, I'm coming, replied Nito. Silently, he shot Izuku one more glance, nodding his head towards the boy's bracelet, before he turned and walked away, leaving the green-haired boy to stand alone. Stunned, Izuku watched the blonde disappear around the corner, murmuring, Nito, just what have you lived through to get like this? As Daniela ate her stack of pancakes, her eyes drifted across the cafeteria to where she saw the boy from yesterday enter with two other girls, one older and one younger, on either side of him. Based on how comfortable the three sounded, Daniela guessed they must have been siblings, despite their distinctly different appearances. Maybe childhood friends then. Maybe they could be interesting to befriend after all, muttered Daniela, gulping down another mouthful of pancakes. But she stopped herself, slapping her forehead as punishment for forgetting her interaction with the green-haired boy the day before. He was friends with the Shnees, the scum of Atlas of Remnant. Anyone who was friends with those bastards must be just as bad by association. Don't close yourself off. Her father's parting words rang through her mind like a siren. I know how stubborn you can be. Don't let that hurt your relations with your new team or your classmates. Then you'll just be adding to your problems rather than fixing them. Annoyed, Daniela slammed down her fork so hard on the table that it earned her some weird looks from the students around her. As much as she hated to admit it, her father's words may carry some weight. Acting so cold-hearted would only hurt the image of her fellow Faunus. Besides, it wasn't like that boy did anything necessarily wrong enough for her to completely dismiss him. Not yet, at least. Maybe she should give him a second chance. Scoffing, Daniela pushed her plate away, suddenly losing her appetite. No, if she backs down on her values so easily, then she might as well not have them. Besides, chances are, after today, she'll never see him again aside from the occasional class together, so it won't even matter. Hey, are you going to eat that? A peppy voice spoke up, snapping Daniela out of her thoughts. Surprised, Daniela blinked and turned to see an energetic, bubbly girl in a pink shirt and orange red hair gesturing to Daniela's half-eaten plate with a hungry sparkle in her sky blue eyes. With a polite smile, Daniela pushed the plate in the girl's direction. Knock yourself out. I never like to eat too much before a battle. Overeating makes me sleepy. As the girl dug into the plate like a starving animal, the Australian boy nodded at Daniela approvingly. Smart call. It wouldn't be a good idea to fall asleep in the forest. Speaking of the forest, the girl perked up, swallowing a pancake whole in one gulp. Ren, let's come up with a plan to find each other. She grabbed the boy's sleeve, making him look at her and giving Daniela the opening to slip away towards the locker rooms. As Izuku grabbed his sword out of his locker, he turned to Ruby, who was humming happily under her breath. I'm glad to see you in a better mood today. On the other side of Ruby, Yang added, yeah, what's up with that? Of course I'm happy, Ruby chimed, pulling Crescent Rose out of her locker. No more awkward small talk or getting to know you stuff. Today I get to let my sweetheart do all the talking. She pulled her weapon close, cooing at it like it was her daughter. But Yang, fixing her gauntlet, cut the girl's cheerful mood short. Well, remember Ruby, you're not the only one going through initiation. If you want to grow up, you're going to have to meet new people and learn to work together. Besides, Izuku agreed, meeting new people can be exciting. How else can you learn all about their different semblances and weapons? No better than from the sources themselves, right? Rolling her eyes, Ruby gagged. Ugh, both of you are so annoying. For one, she turned and poked Izuku in the chest. Not everyone is as socially talented as you, Izuku, so stay out of this, all right? I can learn all I need about others' weapons by watching them fight, not stirring up conversation. And two, she turned and jabbed the same finger in Yang's direction. I don't need to grow up. I drink milk. But what about when we form teams? Izuku countered. Considering there's 4 people on a team, you're going to have to make friends with at least one new person. Shoulders dropping, Ruby shrugged. Well, yeah, but I'll be on a team with you too, so you can be there to do the friend-making for me. Chuckling awkwardly, Yang pulled her hair over her shoulder and pointed out. But that's assuming we're all on the same team, right? Maybe there's a chance we won't be all together. Catching on to the oldest subtle message, Ruby brushed Izuku aside and fully focused on her oldest sibling. My dearest sister Yang, are you implying that you don't want to be on a team with Izuku and I? Panicked, Yang held up her hands and, no, not at all. I just was thinking, maybe being on a different team will help you break out of your shell, that's all. Sputtering, Ruby struggled to muster up the words to retort her sister's claim. So Izuku, overwhelmed by his sister's fighting, tried to step in. Ruby, Yang has a point, actually. Offended, Ruby spun around towards her brother and gasped, Izuku, first you betrayed me yesterday. And now you're taking Yang's side over mine. I can't believe you. No, flustered, Izuku amended. I meant about us not being guaranteed to end up on the same team. Even if we get to choose our partners, I doubt we'd get to choose every member of our team, right? And there's so many students going through initiation that the odds of all of us ending up on the same team are. He trailed off, calculating the numbers in his mind, with only bits and pieces of his math slipping through his lips. All right, Ruby swatted at her brother, snapping him out of his ramble. I get it. While the 3 siblings continued their conversation, a few lockers down, Nito adjusted his belt and turned to Ochako. What's our plan for meeting up in the forest to ensure we're partners? Our plan, echoed Ochako, looking up at the blonde, confused. Just because you're here to be my bodyguard doesn't mean we have to be on the same team. I want to meet new people, not be stuck with someone as annoying and judgmental as you. Putting a hand on his hip, Nito countered. How exactly am I supposed to protect you if we're not on the same team? I take back my compliment from yesterday. It seems you're as short-sighted as ever. Wouldn't it be wiser to not waste strength on protecting your own back and direct that strength elsewhere? Puffing her cheeks, Ochako opened her mouth to protest, giving Nito's words a moment's thought. Her cheeks flushed when she realized he had a point. It wasn't like he'd back down from protecting her, and it'd be nice to guarantee someone watching her back. Sighing, Ochako relented. Okay, you might have a point. Well, I could just use my semblance to allow me to stay above the treetops and keep an eye out for you. And then I'll just be careful to not make partners with anyone else while on the way. Nito began to reply, but the loud bang of someone slamming into the wall cut him off, causing both of them to grab their weapons in alarm. Their eyes darted across the room, where they saw a blond boy in white armor hanging from a red spear that was thrown so hard it pierced the cement wall behind him. Groaning in pain, the boy tried to pull himself free, but his undershirt was hooked on the weapon, keeping him locked in place. Curiously, Ochako walked over to ask what happened, but she got her answer when Weiss and a red-headed girl walked past him, the latter pulling the spear out of the wall, making the blonde drop to the floor. Smugly, Weiss smirked. That should teach you to stay away from us, you annoying idiot. Ochako bit back the urge to roll her eyes at that, doubting that her sister did anything. Meanwhile, the red-headed girl and owner of the spear smiled guiltily and apologized. "Sorry about that, but it was nice to meet you, John." With that, the two girls walked out of the room, leaving the boy moaning in pain on the floor. Instantly, the trio of siblings rushed over to help him, and 𝗧𝗪 pulled Izuku aside to question him while the girls helped John to his feet. "Hey Zuko, what happened? What did he do?" Blushing from the second embarrassment, Izuku explained, Oh, I only got bits and pieces of it. But apparently, John tried to flirt with 𝗬𝗏, the red-headed girl, but didn't know who 𝗬𝗏 was and also called 𝗬𝗏 a snow angel, which really upset her, which caused her to ask 𝗬𝗏 to do. "Well, you saw it. Snow angel," repeated Nito, crossing his arms. "Every day I think I couldn't be more disappointed in our so-called protectors, and every day the universe proves me wrong." Face-palming, 𝗧𝗪 announced, "You know, Nito, you say a lot of questionable and rude things, but this is one of the few times I actually agree with you on something." However, not even a second later, she perked back up and looked over at Izuku with an intrigued glimmer. "Wait, but why would she be upset about not recognizing 𝗬𝗏? Is she famous or something?" At that, Izuku jumped back, his embarrassed smile morphing into a look of shock and confusion. "What? How do you not know about 𝗬𝗏, Nikos? She graduated top of her class at 𝗬𝗪𝗏 Academy, far above the other students. She also won the Mistral Regional Tournament 4 years in a row, a new record for the competitors, and she was one of the youngest competitors to win, having won her first tournament when she was only 13 years old. Nobody knows what her semblance is because she's really good at hiding it, but there are a bunch of people on the internet trying to theorize what it could be. She's totally awesome. Seriously, that's really cool," awed 𝗧𝗪, the same excited glimmer sparkling in her eyes. Meanwhile, Nito rolled his eyes. "I wouldn't praise her so much if I were you." Not to her face. Izuku tilted his head, confused. "Why? Isn't it obvious, or do I have to spell it out?" mocked Nito, putting his hands on his hips. "If she cared about her fame or achievements, then why is she here at Beacon, and not at Haven, where they're much more likely to praise her for that stuff?" Pursing her lips, 𝗧𝗪's eyes dimmed and her gaze drifted downwards out of guilt. Oh, you have a point. She's probably had enough of people putting her on a pedestal." Izuku nodded, his own excited glimmer fading. "Yeah, I guess that kind of stuff doesn't really matter right now, since, either way, we're all going through the same initiation and same classes. She probably wants to be treated as an equal, not an idol." His eyes drifted downwards, shame bubbling in his gut for his word earlier. Nito had a point. As much as he praised people like 𝗬𝗏 for their skills and abilities, sometimes he forgot that they were still people, not just idols. Throwing an arm around the green-haired boy, 𝗧𝗪 smiled. But don't let Nito ruin your day. He tends to do that. We've all made that mistake before, so don't beat yourself up about it, alright? Let's just focus on our initiation and doing the best we can." Izuku's guilt faded and his smile reformed on his face, a new sense of excitement and anxiety twisting his stomach as the three walked out of the locker room and towards their initiation location. As each student stood on one of the silver plates lined along the cliff's edge, 𝗂𝗏 and Glinda approached the edge of the cliff and turned back to look at the long line of new students. Taking a sip of his drink, 𝗂𝗏 declared, "For years, you have trained to become warriors, and today, your abilities will be evaluated in the Emerald Forest." Behind him, Glinda took over. "Now, I'm sure many of you have heard rumors about the assignment of teams. Well, allow us to put an end to your confusion. Each of you will be given teammates. Today." Nito and 𝗧𝗪 exchanged a look, expecting as much. Nearby, Ruby's face lost all color while Izuku tried to silently reassure her by patting her on the shoulder, but the girl brushed him off. On the other side, the excited red-headed girl turned to her partner, bragging that she was right. 𝗂𝗏 continued, "These teammates will be with you for the rest of your time here at Beacon, so it is in your best interest to be paired with someone with whom you can work well." That being said, he paused, allowing the silence to build up the tension and anticipation hanging in the air. "The first person you make eye contact with after landing will be your partner for the next 4 years. What? Several cries of protest rang out amongst the students, some in defeat while others in rage of the almost hypocritical speech the headmaster was making. A few students were bouncing with excitement at the idea, while others started to shake in terror of how things could go so terribly wrong. Izuku started mumbling to himself, considering how he could control and influence those conditions to get a good partner, while Nito and 𝗧𝗪 nodded to each other in silence, a confirmation to follow through on the plan they made in the locker room. Holding up his hand to quiet the students down, 𝗂𝗏 ordered, "All right, I'm not done. After you've partnered up, make your way to the northern end of the forest. You will meet opposition along the way. Do not hesitate to destroy everything in your path, or you will die." John laughed in pain, his body starting to visibly vibrate in fear from the very thought of what they might face. "You will be monitored and graded for the duration of your initiation, but our instructors will not intervene. You will find an abandoned temple at the end of the path containing several relics. Each pair must choose one and return to the top of the cliff. We will regard that item, as well as your standing, and grade you appropriately. Are there any questions? A dozen hands shot into the air. No? Good. Now, take your positions. Some of the people with their hands raised groaned in frustration, but adjusted their stances into a more favorable position as the people at the end of the line started to fly into the air. 𝗂𝗧𝗄 bent down and kept her open hands lingering by her feet, as if she were already mid-fall and about to go into a roll. Beside her, Nito pulled out 2 of his pocket watches, one with gravity dust and the other with air dust, but kept them inactive. A couple spots down, Izuku drew his sword and switched its form to have the gun ready to fire. In the other direction, Daniela bent her knees to push off of the platform and focused her gaze towards the far end of the forest, trying to take in as many details as possible. One by one, they each flew high into the air, high enough to make the trees of the forest below look like plastic toys in a kid's game. All the sights of the school and the other students faded into the background. The initiation has begun. The wind rushed past the students' ears as gravity pulled them back towards Remnant, now scattered all over the forest. 𝗂𝗧𝗄 watched the blurs of colors of other students fade into the distance and eventually disappear below the tree line. Other students nearby used their weapons to slow down their falls or prepared themselves for landing. But 𝗂𝗧𝗄 kept her weapons sheathed and pulled her knees close to her chest, allowing her to reach her heels, which she used her semblance on. Instantly, she could feel the weight of gravity leave her body, though that didn't stop her falling. The air resistance helped slow her down until she stopped just above the tree line. She bit back the urge to vomit from the motion sickness of the change in velocity and the side effect of the strong use of her semblance. Luckily, she still floated high enough that she had a clear sight of all the students still falling. Amongst them included Izuku, who flicked his fingers to slow down his fall, sending out a strong burst of wind that tore through the trees below and redirecting him towards the taller trees in the distance. When he got close, he held out his sword next to him, catching onto one of the trunks and digging into it to slow Izuku down until he landed with a soft roll. Sheathing his sword, Izuku lifted his gaze to the sky to see blurs of other students shoot past him. However, he didn't see the blur of red and flower petals of his younger sister, which rubbed the green-haired boy the wrong way. If he didn't see her, odds are that they didn't land near each other, giving them more opportunities to run into someone else before they saw each other. Still, it wasn't like Izuku could do much about it now. Rather than latch onto that, Izuku cringed in fear of his sister's outburst when they eventually meet up again, and deduced his best odds were to head north and hope he ran into someone along the way. As he sprinted through the forest, the wind brushing past his face and blocking out the rest of the world created an aura of isolation that left Izuku alone with his thoughts, mainly about potential partners. Sure, he preferred to partner up with Yang or Ruby, especially since he's been theorizing about possible ways his and Ruby's semblances could form new and stronger moves together. And if he teamed up with Ruby, that would ease her into Beacon easier, and the two could have each other's backs as being 2 of the youngest students at Beacon. And Yang would also be nice, as she and Izuku have similar fighting styles, but that could be detrimental as much as it is beneficial. Still, Izuku, despite what others thought, wasn't naive enough to believe that it happened. He needed to consider other possibilities. 𝗂𝗧𝗄, she seemed nice, and they both had visions together, so being partners would make it easier to talk about any new discoveries they made. Plus, her knives and fluid fighting style allowed her to be flexible in a fight. Her more light-footed fighting style also complemented Izuku's heavy hitting well, covering each other's weaknesses. But he also overheard her and Nito discussing plans to find each other in the forest, which meant that odds were they'd partner up with each other. What about Weiss? Maybe not, actually. He had a feeling that it'd turn into a disaster. John, he's nice, if a bit clueless, but Izuku's been there before. But Izuku didn't know anything about his semblance, much less how capable he was in a fight, and the facts he's seen so far weren't exactly displaying John in a favorable light. But still, just because he lacks experience doesn't leave room for him to grow. On the other hand, would that work well with Izuku's team? Unfortunately, Izuku wrapped himself so deeply into his thoughts, running his mind over every possible person he met in the past 24 hours, that he failed to notice the swarm of 𝗧𝗓 until one of their paws slapped him in the face and sent him flying back, using his own momentum against him. Reacting quickly, he rolled backwards along the grass, but the force change sent a spike of pain through his body. The moment his feet touched the ground, he drew his sword and faced the pack of 𝗧𝗓, 5 of them, all growling and foaming at the mouths, letting out a snarl deep enough to shake the trees around them. One of the bear-like Grimm charged straight for Izuku, who swiftly ducked around the giant Grimm, pulling out his sword and digging it into the bear's side all within the same motion. Using his momentum and his semblance at 8%, he turned on his heel and launched the Grimm straight into the rest of the pack. Sadly, the throw wasn't enough to kill the 𝗧𝗓, it still knocked down 2 of its packmates, leaving only 2 to charge straight at Izuku, even more aggravated than before. In sync, they both launched their full bodies towards Izuku, likely trying to pin him down, but Izuku leapt backwards out of the way, pushing off the trunk behind him, and flipped over the two 𝗓𝗏. While flying through the air, he extended his semblance to his weapon, enforcing his bullets with the same strength as the rest of his body. Once over the two 𝗓𝗏, he fired a shot from the barrel of his weapon at just the right angle to add a spin to his fall, creating a shockwave that shot out from the swing of his blade and straight through the two 𝗧𝗓, cutting them clean in half. As he landed back on the ground, one of the remaining 𝗧𝗓 tried to surprise attack him from behind, but he spun around and blocked the strike with the flat side of his blade. He pushed the 𝗧𝗓 back and followed through the motion by spinning his blade around and jabbing it straight into the belly of the 𝗓𝗏. Letting out an empowered yell, Izuku used all the strength in his arms to drag his sword through the monster's body and out of one of its shoulders, brutally ending the bear in seconds. Once again using his follow-through to his advantage, he flipped over the 𝗓𝗏's dying corpse to dodge another attack from a different 𝗧𝗓. However, that threw him into the final 𝗧𝗓, who retaliated by striking at Izuku. Reacting quickly, Izuku shifted his position mid-flip and kicked the creature straight in its face, cracking the bear's exoskeleton and sending it flying back from the force of the impact. The second Izuku's feet touched the broken ground, he spun his sword and jumped back so that he faced both 𝗧𝗓 at the same time. Raising his sword in front of his face, his eyes darted between the two bears. As much as he wanted to stay on the offensive, his shortened breath and tightened muscles triggered warning bells in his mind to calm down. If he pushed too far too soon, he'd be nothing but dead weight to his partner, which wouldn't give off a favorable first impression, one far worse than his sister's explosion the day before. So, instead, Izuku steadied his breath, tucked his arms close to his body, and borrowed his gaze at his opponents. All around him, time faded away and seconds ticked by like minutes as he prepared for one of the creatures to charge towards him. To his surprise, before either could do so, an entirely new element entered the fight, a bornwish black portal that opened in the sky just above the tree line. From the portal, the wolf girl emerged with an energetic laughter, rolling along the grass and straightening up with her back to Izuku and her eyes locked onto the two 𝗧𝗓 𝗓𝗏. Instantly, the girl's smile faded. Seriously? Couldn't even let me touch the ground before you had to cause trouble for me? Huh. She reached for a small cylinder on the curve of her back. As soon as she yanked it from its sheath, the cylinder extended in both directions to reveal its true form as a stringless bow. The two ends of the bow glowed a pale blue and a string of ice dust formed between the tips, with a matching arrow already notched. Smugly, the girl spun towards one of the 𝗧𝗓 and fired her arrow at its legs, trapping it in ice. Quickly, she turned on her back heel and used her bow to block a swing from the other 𝗧𝗓. Pushing it back, the girl threw down her bow and charged after the beast, swinging her bow back and forth across the beast's body, filling it with cuts until the bear's body finally turned to ash. Breaking free of the ice, the remaining 𝗧𝗓 roared in pure rage and charged straight towards the wolf faunus, who performed a back handspring to dodge the 𝗓𝗏's attack. Once back on her feet, the girl flicked her bow, causing the string's color to change to a dark purple and a new arrow of matching color to form, ready to fire. Jumping back to put some distance between her and the creature, she fired the arrow straight into the monster's chest, causing it to go flying back through the trees with enough force to snap several trunks clean in half and turning the beast halfway to ash before it even landed. Instantly, Izuku shot out into the clearing, his mouth rambling before he even registered what he was doing. Wow, is that a dust-based bow? The idea of using the central canister as the dust storage and infusing the rest of the bow is so clever and reduces the possibility of a dust accident. What? The girl spun around to face the boy, reflexively tightening her grip on her bow in the process. However, upon locking gazes with Izuku, both of them stiffened into wood boards as the sudden realization of both their horrible, disastrous, no-good decision struck them with more pain than a bolt of lightning to the head. Oh, you cannot be serious. Meanwhile, Nito cautiously moved through the dark woods, checking the compass on his wrist to make sure he didn't lose his way. Under his breath, he muttered, "How many of these idiots forgot a compass? Amateurs." Every few seconds, he glanced towards the sky, expecting a certain brunette to come crashing down on him. As much as he'd rather go looking for her, knowing he'd breathe easier once he confirmed her safety. He also knew that he lacked any way to track her, so the wiser decision would be to head towards their common goal, the relics in the north. The sounds of rustling bushes nearby cut the blonde's train of thought short. He reached for two of his pocket watches and pointed his gaze downwards to avoid an unwanted eye contact. Fortunately, instead of another student, a giant snake-like 𝗓𝗏 called a king 𝗧𝗪 emerged from the bushes, raising its head high above the trees and staring down at Nito with its blood-red eyes like Nito looked like a flavorful treat. Pursing his lips, Nito pressed the button on his watches, transforming them into a matching pair of daggers, one made of ice and the other fire. Sprinting straight towards the creature, he leapt up just in time to avoid the creature slamming headfirst into him, instead causing it to bury its head in the dirt below. He flipped around midair and landed on the head of the beast, digging the 2 daggers into the creature right under its skull. As soon as the daggers pierced the creature's surface, he shattered the 2 blades, creating a smoke-filled explosion that shattered the mask of the monster to pieces. Letting out a breath, Nito's shoulders slumped and his guard lowered. Sadly, this moment of relaxation gave the King 𝗔𝗂𝗃 the opening for the second head, with white scales and black mask, to rise out from the other end of the monster and slam straight into Nito's back, sending him flying across the grass. Stunned from the pain of the strike, Nito barely managed to shift into a side roll along the grass, minimizing the damage as much as possible. Still, he groaned in pain while pushing himself on his feet. In those few seconds of vulnerability, the Gsym encircled the boy with its body, closing in on all sides. Unfazed, Nito hooked his 2 pocket watches and grabbed 2 others, forming one of them into his gravity gun, which he launched towards the ground, giving him enough force to fly out of the snake's trap. Once back on the grass, he spun around to see the white head snarling and glaring at Nito, slithering along the dirt towards him. Holding his breath, he lowered his gun and raised his other pocket watch, focusing his gaze on the charging snake. His finger lingered on the button of the watch as he counted down to the right moment in his mind. Right when the snake head was within inches of his face, Nito pressed the button of his pocket watch and threw himself towards the snake. A bright, light blue shield of hard light dust formed around Nito like a force field, bouncing the snake back and throwing it off guard. Sadly, due to him focusing so hard on this snake head, he failed to notice the other head slithering up behind him, poised to attack. Realizing his mistake, he spun on his back heel to push the other head back using a similar method, only for a blur to shoot down from the skies and kick the snake head between the eyes, knocking it to the ground. The blur was none other than 𝗂𝗃𝗁, who glanced back long enough to make eye contact with Nito and confirm their partnership before she started to run along the back of the snake like it was a slippery hill rather than a live monster. Furious, the creature snarled and tried to shake the girl off by throwing its head back, but 𝗂𝗃𝗁 slid along the creature's smooth scales and, as she reached the other head of the snake, tapped her fingertips against her body, causing a bright pink glow to form around her. Thanks to her weightless state, she flew off of the other end of the snake like a ramp and hovered over the creature. But the snake followed after her, opening its mouth to engulf her whole. Unfazed, the girl waited until the head was within arm's reach before she pressed her fingertips together and deactivated her weightlessness. As she fell, she grabbed one of the snake's fangs, pulling it down with her. For a moment, the snake head yanked downwards with the girl, until the fang finally snapped and the recoil of the sudden release of force threw the creature's head back, screaming in pain. She rolled along the ground and spun around to face the other head, who dived for her, pissed to see what happened to its partner. Smirking, the girl rolled out of the way and lodged the fang straight into one of the creature's eyes. Flicking her wrists, the palms of her gloves changed to a light blue as she used the extra energy to dig the fang so deep into the creature's eye that the head exploded into ash, finally killing it once and for all. Approaching her, Nito scolded, "Pa, talk about stealing the spotlight. Nobody likes a show-off, you know." "Show off," mocked 𝗂𝗃𝗁, returning his sly grin back at him. "You're the one who was taking forever to kill something as easy as a King 𝗔𝗂𝗃. You know they don't give bonus points for flashiness, right? 1. It's called strategy and efficient fighting. 2. I'm pretty sure the one showing off is the one who killed a Gsym with its own fang when she has daggers of the exact same size on her." At that, 𝗂𝗃𝗁 flipped her hair over her shoulder like a dramatic model and walked off, turning her back to Nito. "Oh come on, I was just having a bit of fun. Would it really hurt for you to lighten up a little? Risking our lives fighting shadow creatures is not meant to be fun." "She's gone." Nito deflated upon seeing his new partner disappear into the trees, either not hearing or brushing off the blonde's words. Groaning, the boy facepalmed. "Sometimes I question the universe's decision to place this job on me." Still, he followed after her into the woods and towards the northern temple. Flicking through the camera feeds on her tablet, Glinda walked over to 𝗂𝐵IN and informed, "It appears the last partnership was formed, sir. 𝗂𝗃𝗁 and Nito 𝗵𝗲. Honestly, I'm not certain who I feel more sorry for of the two. At least they appear to know each other decently well. Between them, the pairings of Lai Ren and Nora Valkyrie, Ruby Rose and Weiss Schnee, Yang Xiao Long and Blake Belladonna, John Arc and Pirha Nikos, and even Izuku Midoriya Xiao Rose and Daniela Maroon. Fate certainly has taken an interest in opposites, it seems." She looked over at her superior, only to see him fixated on the camera following Izuku and Daniela as they trekked through the woods, unresponsive to Glinda's comment. Deciding to take a risk, she inquired, "Sir, I know you recruited Ruby Rose for her silver eyes in relation to Summer, and I've frankly given up on trying to pry an answer out of you on the 2 Atlas kids. But why did you admit Izuku Midoriya Xiao Rose early?" Huffing, she stated plainly, "From what I've seen, there's nothing truly remarkable about him except who his mentor is. Even his semblance just seems like a form of strength semblance." With a small smile on his lips, 𝗂𝐵IN admitted, "I suppose it's because he reminds me of an old friend of mine." Confused, Glinda looked up at the headmaster, but, seeing the man fall silent, Glinda knew pushing him would be a waste of time, especially when he chose to be cryptic like this. So, instead, she clicked one of the camera views that focused on said boy and his partner, who coldly marched ahead without caring about leaving the green-haired boy behind. "I cannot believe I got partnered up with you," complained Daniela, pushing through the trees, not bothering to check if her partner was following. Rolling her eyes, she confessed, "Well, I'd rather be partnered with you than one of those annoying 𝗧𝗍 sisters, though you should have been able to handle a couple 𝗧𝗧 on your own." Biting back the urge to point out that he killed 3 𝗧𝗧 on his own, Izuku instead rushed up next to his partner and looked up at her, curious. "If I may ask, why do you hate the 𝗧𝗍 family so much?" Seeing the death glare she shot him, he flushed and hastily added, I mean, I know all about the SDC's horrible business practices and mistreatment of the faunus and all that, and I understand hating them because of that, but..." His hands dropped back to his side as his expression turned more honest. "This isn't like that, is it? It's more personal." When Daniela stiffened and froze in place, Izuku knew he hit the nail on the head. But, just as quickly as she froze, the wolf faunus returned to her march. "That's none of your business. We're partners, not friends." Furiously, she turned her back to him and continued her march through the woods. Sheepishly, Izuku bit back the urge to scowl at his partner's poor attitude. What did he even do? He wasn't a 𝗧𝗍. He didn't act racist towards her, at least, not on purpose, and he already apologized a ton for the time he did. Was it just because he defended a 𝗧𝗍? Shaking off that train of thought, he chased after her and asked, "Hey, do you know where we're going? You don't have a compass out and you clearly haven't been in these woods before." Defensively, Daniela barked, "Hey, how do you know I haven't been here before?" Unfazed, Izuku informed, "You tackled me yesterday when you fell from your portal, and you said that your semblance is awful in new areas along with commenting about how everything looks the same. So I'm guessing your semblance involves picture the location of your portals? Yes. The fact that you made the same mistake today instead of portaling straight to the northern temple means you also must be new to this forest like you were to the campus." At first, a heavy silence hung over the two, and Izuku worried his ramble-like answer scared off any chance he had to mend their partnership. To his surprise, the girl burst into a giggling fit. I guess I should have expected that. People who are the rambling type do tend to be the analytical and clever type." Sheepishly, her smile softened even after her giggles died down. Her eyes glossed over, considering something in her mind, one that gave her conflicting thoughts based on her pursed lips. In Daniela's mind, she remembered her thought process from that morning and her father's warning. This boy did seem genuinely good-hearted. And now he's clearly got some observation skills to back him up, not as common of a trait amongst huntsmen as she'd like to hope. Perhaps she could calm down on her stubbornness just this once, only because it would be more beneficial than costly. But this is the only exception. Reluctantly, she turned back to face him in full. "You know, looking back, I realize I may have been a bit too harsh on you initially. If we're going to be partners for the next 4 years, you seem to be far from the worst option. It could be beneficial to have someone with your observation skills on my side." Holding out a hand to him, she offered, "How about we start over? My name is Daniela Maroon. What's yours?" Relieved, Izuku happily accepted the hand. "Sure. I'm Izuku Midori Asayo Rose. I hope we can form a strong partnership. So can I ask you about why you hate them?" Still no. Meanwhile, Nito and Ochako breached the tree line to see a rundown temple area with only a fragment of a wall remaining. Pieces of rubble scattered throughout the grassy clearing, and a few lone walls in every direction around the small circle, resembling the massive structure the building once was. In the center of it all, the cobblestone circle peeked out from the grass and mold, with several small pedestals lining a runic circle carved into the stone, like spells one see in a fantasy game. On each pedestal sat a different chess piece, either the color of cheap gold or a midnight black. Noticeably, a couple of pedestals lacked any chess pieces on them. Noticing this upon approach, Nito concluded, "Some of the chess pieces are missing. It seems we weren't the first ones here." Sarcastically, Ochako replied, "Yeah, that's pretty clear. And you say I point out the obvious." To which Nito rolled his eyes and pointedly refused to respond. Giggling at the boy's silence, Ochako hummed to herself, "It looks like there's 2 versions of every piece, 2 black knights, 2 gold rooks, 2 black pawns, even 2 white queens. Each team is composed of 2 pairings, right? So whatever 2 pairs choose the same chess piece likely ends up on the same team together," finished Nito. "Therefore, if we pick a piece that still has a partner, and then stay here to watch over the temple, we can control who our other 2 teammates end up being." "Clever. I suppose even a broken clock is right twice a day." Huffing, Ochako snapped, "Do you really refuse to ever say anything nice to me?" "That is nice, excuse you." Before Ochako could retort, the sound of laughter from nearby shut her up and the 2 immediately raised their weapons in alarm, turning at lightning speed towards the source. From the far tree line, 2 teens, a blonde chick and a black-haired girl, approached them. While the black-haired girl reached for her own weapon in retaliation, the blonde greeted the duo much more cheerfully. Hey, you must be 𝐒𝐴𝐻𝐿 and 𝐵𝑇𝑂, right? 𝐒𝐿𝐵 told me to keep an eye out for you guys. I'm Yang, 𝐒𝐿𝐵's older sister. Have you seen him anywhere? Older sister, echoed 𝐒𝐴𝐻𝐿, shocked as she sheathed her daggers. Lowering his own guard, 𝐵𝑇𝑂 muttered, irritating and overwhelming 𝗵𝑃𝑃𝑛𝑖s checks out. As the two girls approached, the black-haired girl spoke up, her voice calm and steady. We overheard you talk about how the chess pieces relate to the choosing of the teams. I agree that you might have a point. Quirking a brow at her, 𝐵𝑇𝑂 began, and you are? Blake Belladonna, replied Blake, as she eyed the chess pieces with scrutiny, as if the decision in front of her dictated her fate for the rest of her life. Which, in a way, it might. On the other side of the circle, Yang walked up next to 𝐒𝐴𝐻𝐿. Well, I want to team up with either Izuku or Ruby, no offense, so I'll just pick one of the ones with their partners still here. 𝐻𝑚. Looking over the pieces, her eyes settled on the knight. Excitedly, she snatched it up and turned back towards her partner. Hey Blake, how about a little horsey? You mean the knight, 𝐵𝑇𝑂 corrected. But Blake ignored him and rolled her eyes fondly at her partner. Sure. Meanwhile, 𝐒𝐴𝐻𝐿 eyed her own pieces and found herself drawn towards the white king pieces. Picking up the white king piece, another vision surfaced in her mind. A girl with pitch black hair tied back in a giant ponytail looked up at 𝐒𝐴𝐻𝐿, blinking with confusion. You want me to teach you chess? Cheeks flushed and voice quiet. 𝐒𝐴𝐿 nodded. 𝐵𝑚. I mean you're super smart and you come from such a luxurious background. So I thought you would be the one to ask. Hastily, she added, Oh, but don't feel obligated or anything. I don't want to force you, and it's okay if you don't know how to play. She turned to leave, but the other girl stopped her and, no, it's all right. You just caught me off guard. What I meant was, why do you want to learn how to play all of a sudden? Well, 𝐒𝐴𝐿's gaze dropped to the board in her hands as her brown eyes glossed over. After everything that happened recently, I realized that my quirk isn't that strong in battle. Pursing her lips in thought. The other girl paused, reflecting on memories that 𝐒𝐴𝐿 couldn't surface. 𝐻𝑚. You do have a point there, sadly. Right. So then, I thought if my quirk wasn't very strong, then I'd just have to be smart to make up for it. Determined, she raised her gaze back up to her friend, allowing the other girl to see the determined spark in her eyes. So I swear to become better with strategy and quick decisions. Which, though her fire remained, her smile turned sheepish once again, brings me to chess. After all, what better way to practice strategic thinking than with one of the most well-known strategy games? To 𝐒𝐴𝐿's astonishment, that caused the other girl to light up and her eyes to widen to the point that proud tears nearly pricked her eyes. Excitedly, the other girl agreed, clapping her hands together. What a wonderful idea, I'd be happy to teach you. As the two girls started to set up the board, a single thought passed through 𝐒�𝐿's mind. I need to be better. I swear to be the best hero and guardian I can be, so I never fail anyone ever again. 𝐒𝐴𝐿, are you okay? A voice behind the girl snapped her back to reality like an ice cube on her back. Flustered, the girl swatted the other person away and jumped back, her eyes still wide and her breath catching in her throat. Blinking, 𝐒𝐴𝐿's shoulders relaxed when she realized the voice belonged to Yang, who stared at 𝐒𝐴𝐿 with a concerned look in her eyes. Calming her breath, 𝐒𝐴𝐿 apologized. Why? Yeah, sorry, I just kinda got lost in thought. So, should we wait for the others? Her eyes locked with 𝐵𝑇𝑂, whose firm and knowing gaze spoke a million words to her. Still, his lips remained closed. Instead, he turned his back to her in order to keep watch on the forest for any new arrival. Slipping her own chess piece into her pocket, Yang nodded. Yeah, I want to wait for Izuku and Ruby. Oh, speaking of which, I should let them know that I found the temple. Quickly, she pulled out her scroll and opened up her messenger, switching to a group chat between her and her sibling. Curious, 𝐒𝐴𝐿 tried to peer over the taller girl's shoulder, but to no avail. Oh, have you guys been keeping in contact with each other? Yep, Yang nodded, proud of the idea. Izuku's idea. Speaking of which, it looks like he and Ruby both found partners. Reading through the messages, the blonde girl winced. Ouch, it looks like Ruby's stuck with the Ice Queen. As soon as the words left her mouth, the girl stiffened and covered her mouth with her free hand, realizing her slip-up. But, to her disbelief, 𝐒𝐴𝐿 giggled. Haha, Ice Queen, I haven't heard that one before. Oh, that fits her really well. Hee, I'm gonna use that. Sighing in relief, Yang continued, and it sounds like Izuku's teamed up with someone called Daniela. Who's that? It doesn't sound like she's very happy that he's her partner, though. I feel bad for both of them. At that, 𝐵𝑇𝑂 approached the duo. Daniela. My guess is she's the wolf faunus from yesterday. Wait, that gives me an idea, 𝐒𝐴𝐿 blurted out, snatching the scroll from Yang's hands. Before the other girl could retaliate, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 activated her semblance on herself and pushed herself off of one of the few remaining wall pieces, propelling her high into the air until she could see the entire clearing at once. With a wide smile at her own idea, she took a picture of the clearing and another of the temple and sent them both to the group chat, tagging, "Here's what the northern temple looks like. I hope it helps you guys find it easier." She deactivated her semblance and rolled along the grass, being careful to protect Young's scroll in the process. Grateful, she walked over to the blonde and held out her scroll to her. "Thanks for letting me use your scroll. Sorry about doing that without warning. I was just so caught up in my idea." Taking her phone back, Young checked her messages. Why do you think a picture of the temple will help? It doesn't even show where it is relative to the rest of the forest." Winking, 𝗂𝗏𝗄 teased with a sly smile, "You'll see." Before Young could question her further, two sounds rang out from opposite ends of the forest. One that sounded like a person screaming bloody murder at a tone high enough to make a person's ears ache, and another sound of a Grimm's low roar, carrying the strength to shake the treetops even miles from the source. The mixture of the two sounds rattled the four teens to the bone, their minds racing through hundreds of thoughts and questions, but only one big one was voiced by all of them. "What was that?"